good news is that I'm on time for this meeting. It doesn't happen very often. Welcome, everybody, to the Joint Appropriations Committee. It's good to see everybody. Karen reminds me that before we get this meeting started, that we need to follow the rules of decorum. So the Joint Appropriations Committee meets a little differently than other committees. We're more informal. We try to get as much testimony and feedback as we can, and it's more of a round robin open discussion. So with that, if you have any questions about it, please consult your handbook. All right, Don, fire away.
Here. Here. Senator Kinski. Senator Salazar. Representative Henderson. Here. Representative Larson. Here. Representative Sherwood.
Excused.
Representative Stith. Here. Representative Walters. Here. Representative Zwanitzer. Co-Chairman Nethercott. Chairman Nicholas.
Here, and let's leave the roll open for those two. My guess is that they'll show up one way or the other.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Okay, Don?
Mr. Chairman, the first item for discussion is the adoption of the 2023-2024 interim rules. You adopted temporary rules because you were acting as a joint committee in January of 2023. But pursuant to your motion there, they expired at the end of the session. So along like all other committees, you need to adopt the 2023-2024 rules. These are interim rules for 2 years of the biennium. So you'll do this once. The Joint Appropriations Committee historically has had different rules than the sample rules. Of course, you can adopt the sample rules if you so choose, but you do have a history of adopting alternative rules.
Okay, and Don, tell us what the practice has been, so the folks that are new to this committee, what we've typically done.
Mr. Chairman, your JAC rules usually have been adopted, well, not usually, consistently have been adopted for, we found them for approximately 20 years. And much of them are the same as the traditional sample rules, but some differences. So the sample rules have a chairman and a vice chairman. Your committee rules have historically had 2 co-chairmen, not the chairman, vice chairman structure. Secondly, all bills require a majority of both sides. So 3 senators and 4 representatives on final action of all bills. That is different than the sample rules. And then it does require a quorum, also requires at least 3 members of the Senate and 5 members of the House prior to any action. Now that the majority of each side does not apply to amendments. And nor, frankly, would that apply to the amendments if you adopted the sample rules either. Other than that, most of the differences are really specific to the budget. And there are some unusual actions there, not all of which have been rigorously adhered to. Historically, you, as you indicated in your opening remarks, have been more informal. But it provides a process by which any of the statewide elected officials or the judicial branch can submit letters that you must consider. Legislators, your colleagues, cannot. And you cannot accept a late request from an agency or a legislator, but the governor could, or other elected officials. There are also pretty limited comments on or rules on following an agency's presentation. Committee members may ask questions, but it does say that no committee member shall be permitted to speak more than 3 times on a motion. Just frankly, that has not always been strictly adhered to. No one has called for it, a concern on that rule, as you indicated. And this is not just under your leadership, but under prior leadership, this committee has allowed fairly free-flowing debate on motions. The subcommittees shall at least have 1 member from each political party. And historically, you have adhered to doing that. You can recall you've had subcommittees on the data book, for example, or specific interim topics. And you have adhered to that. It can, if you have 3 or 4 subcommittees each year, it can become onerous on the members of the minority party. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a pretty good highlight of what.
Okay, any questions for Don on the rules? Do we have a motion on the rules? We have a motion to adopt the existing rule.
So moved.
Moved by Representative Stiff, seconded by Senator Group. All right, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Too late. Do you have an amendment? Okay. You're more than welcome to make the amendment. Go ahead.
On number 14. Amend in the second line after full membership. Just change that to of the joint committee and period.
And you need to put it in context for us. What does it do?
Just means a majority of the full committee to pass anything.
Any discussion on the amendment? Second. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. That motion failed. Any other amendments? Okay. All those in favor as one more time, all those in favor of the amendment of the motion to adopt the existing rules, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries. Okay. Senator Kinski, sorry you missed roll call. Good to see you. Yep. I know, I told everyone, this is the first time I've been at this meeting early. So we have to regale us about your European excursions when we're on break.
I've got a tremendous slideshow,
Okay.
what I did on my summer vacation.
Okay. All right, Don. And welcome to the new co-chair. It'll be fun. Oh, there she is. Yeah, welcome. Okay, Don, next.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Madam Co-Chair, the first item on your agenda of substance relates to major maintenance. My name is Don Richards. I'm the Budget and Fiscal Administrator for the Legislative Service Office. And I'll give a short introduction, just some background facts before turning it over to the State Construction Department and their personnel. Your priority number 4 for this interim was to review major maintenance, including the state higher education, which is inclusive of the University of Wyoming and community colleges, and K-12's major maintenance. You were encouraged to look at the formula that is used to generate funding, explore other states' major maintenance processes and methods, and explore methods to retain and align allocated funds for large systems, HVAC, roofs, boilers, and the like. Stepping back and beginning with some history, the initial major maintenance formula was developed in 1998 and applied to K-12 only, K-12 school districts. And in figure 1, which appears on page 3, it provides a high-level explanation of the basics of the formula. Now, there are more intricacies that we will get into, but at its most basic level, there is the authorized gross square footage multiplied by a replacement cost, which is then multiplied by 2% to get to the major maintenance allocation payment. The purposes for which major maintenance may be used is defined for schools in Wyoming Statute 21-15-109A. It also appears in quotes in the middle of page 3. And importantly, that these major building and facility repair and replacements, these expenditures are in accordance with the district facilities plan. So the school districts must file their plans with the state construction department. There are permissions beyond this basic construct. For example, 10% of a school district's allocation for major maintenance can be used for major maintenance on enhancements. So for example, what does that mean? If a school district built a pool using their own money, then they could use 10% of their major maintenance for major maintenance of that pool. In 3 specific years, 2015, 2018, and 2020, the legislature saw fit to allow the use of major maintenance funds for security building needs, cameras, enhanced door locks, that sort of thing. Importantly, major maintenance to school districts carries over and is not subject to the operations threshold. So in the operations area, the school districts are limited to carryover of say 15%. That's been increased recently, I believe, to 30%.
One second, Don, go ahead.
So if I may, Don, on those, just to help us understand on that 10% for enhancements or 10% for safety, help me understand if I were a school district and I foresaw a need for a security, something in my security, 10%, it was going to take more than 10% was going to cover. Could I designate that 10%? So this year I got $100. I take 90 of it and spend on the rest of major maintenance, but I set aside that 10% and I keep track of it. The next year I do the same. So now I've got 10 and another 10. The third year I do it again. So I've got 10% of those 3 years that I could accumulate and then use for the cost of this safety thing. That would be, or is it that on year one, I have $100 in major maintenance. I spend all of that $100, but I didn't spend any of it on safety. Is there a thought that I still, because I didn't spend any on safety, there's still this 10% that is warranted that I could carry over because I didn't do any safety improvements? How's that being interpreted?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that is a great question, and it's not at all perhaps obvious, but it is your latter scenario. And on the bottom of page 3, safety security carryover indefinitely, as does enhancements, regardless of whether the allocation has been expended on major building and facility repair and replacement. So if you spent the 100, let's say you received $1 million and you spent all of it. As the way it's being interpreted now, $100,000 in future years could still be expended on enhancement major maintenance, meaning they go, the capacity is there and it is cumulative and it is indefinitely carried over.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead. And so does that equate to 20%? You have 10% for enhancements, another 10% for safety and security?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And safety and security is only in those 3 years, 2015, 18, and 20.
Okay, so the safety one is no longer in play, Mr. Chairman.
Well, if a school district has not spent their allocation from 2018, it still remains allowable today.
So again, just to make sure I've got my head around it. So in 2018, there was an allocation of 10% of those major maintenance funds for safety, and I didn't use it. 2024, I could say, yeah, but we never used it for 2018, so we're going to use it in 2024.
Mr. Chairman, that is how we understand it's being interpreted correctly. Well, it's important to say there is no statute, or I would say any rule that governs this practice.
Okay,
So
thank you. Just want to make sure.
just to follow up on that, then I think there's a spreadsheet on roughly who monitors and calculates that rule. And at some point, it seems to me that whether or not there's a rule or not, it doesn't make any difference. It becomes irrelevant because they're not going to spend 40% of major maintenance or dollars on security. But the mechanism of monitoring it and tracking it to see who does what is probably something that you can talk about when you get up.
So can I have one more follow-up? So I want to come back to the enhancement portion. So if a school district hasn't been doing any enhancements over a decade, and there's a project the community really feels is important and would be for the benefit of their community, but it's not, it would be known as enhancement. Could they then use that decade accumulation of major maintenance enhancements to help do anything other than major maintenance issues with it? Because they use it in acquiring, construction, or anything else with that? Or is it solely for major maintenance of enhanced properties?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, in that it is in statute and it is limited only to the maintenance of local enhancements, not the creation thereof.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many times can this be done? Is there per fiscal period a threshold or constraint?
So, Mr. Chairman, the constraint is on 10% per fiscal period, but that allocation carries forward indefinitely. So if you had $1 million each year, you would, and maybe you spent none in year one, that $100,000 allocation would carry forward. And it would be additive to year two's 100,000, year three's 100,000, as Representative Larson was describing. But you're only adding to that allocation in the amount of 10% per year.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on that information you've provided, would a correction then be to say unencumbered or unexpended funds up to 10% could be used for safety and security and would move forward on a regular basis? Because in your example of $1 million, if they spend all million, let's say we didn't spend any on safety and security, so we still have 100 grand next year to use, but they technically don't have 100 grand because they spent it. It is no longer in their checkbook to be available. So at some point they have to have the dollars available to spend the 100,000, the 200, the 300, depending on the number of years they've let accrue for the safety and security issue. So to make sure that it was money that was actually available, should the language say unencumbered dollars or unexpended up to 10%?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, the legislature absolutely could specify that. I would describe that as a policy choice on your behalf. And I would just note that, and of course the department can correct me, but that would be a difference from the current application. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will go through a little bit more detail on the K-12 formula. And the formula is based on, at its highest level, the educational gross square footage minus lease space, meaning they're not going to receive any major maintenance for lease space, minus the local enhancements, and that was the pool in my example, plus modulars, which are capped by 10% of the educational space. Now, it turns out that cap you don't really need to worry about because no school district has hit that threshold. So it is a nuance in the formula. If you had a small school district that had modulars that were more than 10% of their educational space, they would only be able to count 10% of that modulars. It is not effectuated with any school district today. And it is then the second step is the lesser of those amounts, or 115% of your maximum allocation for major maintenance based upon ADM formula. And it turns out just 4 districts use the adjusted educational gross square footage in recent years, or in this most recent year, I should say. That tells me that many school districts are exceeding, meaning they have more space than the 115% times ADM would allow. It also means that the state is not, by definition, is not allocating major maintenance for all existing square footages. A great example of that is the relatively new Shoshone school, where it was built larger than the enrollment, and you have a lot of empty space in that building. That facility is not receiving major maintenance for all of that vacated or empty space. If the legislature wanted to change that, and I'm not suggesting you do, but this came up in the School Facilities Committee recently, or at least a discussion about it. If you wanted to provide major maintenance to all educational square footage as opposed to that limit, that would cost, in our estimate, roughly $36 million per biennium. So that gives you a sense of the actual space out there that is existing for which major maintenance payments are not being made by the state. Then you take that educational spacement.
Don, do we have a breakdown of that, of what, how that plays out through the various school districts?
Yes, we can do that.
'Cause I'm just curious who, if some stand out compared to others. Sorry to interrupt, Don. Go ahead.
So you take this educational square footage, you multiply it by a replacement value, and then multiply it by 2%. And that is all in statute. And that gives you your major maintenance allocation. There are some nuances here, which I will just touch on. They are briefly discussed on the top of page 3. But for buildings, offices, warehouses, and mothballed space, there is a modification to the formula. For example, offices and warehouse are based on a sliding scale in proportion to their educational space. So if you have office and warehouse space that is less than 10% of your total space, you would get 100% major maintenance. If it's between 10 and 16, you get 90%. If it's between 16 and 21, you get 80%. And if it's 21% or more, the district would only receive 70%. The point being is if you have a large surplus of office space or warehouse space, the state is not going to pay 100% of the major maintenance dollars generated by that empty space.
Don, I did have a question. To just look at the statutory language on the definition that talks about buildings or facilities based upon its original capacity and original intended use. So if they change the use of that building, how does that occur? And then do they adjust it, you know, if they go from office space to classroom space? How technical are they in chasing those dollars?
Mr. Chairman, that I concur with the reading of the statute, and I do believe that the district and the state construction department make those adjustments. But I would have to defer to the department as to how rigorously that occurs. I believe they submit their plan at least every 2 years.
Okay. Go ahead.
So Don, on that graduating scale based on the, would you share that with me again? There's 10%, there's 90%, there's 80%. Could you go through that for me again there? I don't know that I understood that very well.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative, it's in relationship to the office and warehouse percentage of educational space. And I believe if it's less, and for those reading along, this definition is provided for in Wyoming Statute 21-15-109. C, Romanet 7, A through D. And it provides that if the proportion is 10% or less, then the district gets 100%. If it's greater than 10%, but less than 16%, the district will receive 90%. If the proportion is 16% or greater, but less than 21%, the district will receive 80%. And then finally, if the proportion is 21% or greater, the district only receives 70%.
So that's footnote 9 on page 3, right?
And follow, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
And the logic behind that is why the proportional breakdown?
Mr. Chairman, I'll have to defer. I don't recall.
Matt can answer that. Welcome, Matt.
I meant.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Matt Wilmarth, Senior School Finance Analyst. I don't have the background as to why those percentages were selected, but I think the theory is to ensure that districts don't overbuild their warehouse and office space, and that the state is going to continue to maintain that space. I think it's just a built-in inherent.
So Matt, how long has that language been in this current?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's from the initial 1998 codification of the formula. And there was a large study from school finance consultants in, I think Campbell 1 or a result of Campbell 1 that informed that formula. I could certainly go back and see if I can see if the methodology is contained in that final report, but I believe it was part of that initial codification.
And Matt, do you know, since your time, has there been any questions or challenges regarding the language or impacts?
Mr. Chairman, no, and I think big picture, the Supreme Court, in Campbell 4 ruled, the school finance system as adequate and equitable, and that was part of that formula at that time.
Oh, Mr. Chairman. So Matt, if I may, because and all this kind of ties together for me a little bit, but I may not understand it. So in attachment A on page 2, which I believe is 2515-109, in the definitions we have in the office building, we say the office building also includes maintenance facilities and storage buildings, but then you come down to warehouse building, which seemed to me to be more where you do your maintenance facilities. And so it seems like you've got the warehouse, but both of those have a different formula, but the warehouse building is used for storage and equipment. So storage and equipment is found in both definitions. And that seems to lead to some confusion with me, but then could also impact that conversation we're having by overbuilding or however we're doing that. I'm probably not making much sense, but it just seems to me that we duplicate the definition of what these buildings are being used for. And I'm not sure that I think that can lead to some confusion.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think in practical terms, the warehouse has been interpreted to store buses, tires, oil, fuel. The office is storing the administration buildings, paper supplies, printers, and any other equipment that they may have. I don't think there's confusion in practice. I think there's pretty good understanding of what those facilities are and what their uses are.
So, Mr. Chairman, so if I understand, you're saying maybe the definitions are a little weak, but in practice, we're saying because in the definition, it would say warehouse building is a school building or facility primarily used for storage of equipment, materials, and other district property and supplies, including facilities in which buses are stored, maintained, and served. So it would definitely say that used for multiple storage type purposes.
Mr. Chairman, if the committee wants to revisit those definitions, I think that's fine. I don't think they're in practice. I don't think there's confusion in what a facility's purpose is.
And Mr. Chairman, and that's really what I'm asking is because it just may be me that's reading. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Kind of dovetailing off the line of questioning from Representative Larson and reviewing the purpose and issue of this interim topic. It's pretty broad, and I guess to help orient the committee and the public and LSO, whereas the review of major maintenance and how we fund it, I think is important. perhaps starting with the criticisms that we've experienced or the challenges that we have to understand what problem we're trying to solve, other than just a general overview. Because for me, it's not clear to me what criticisms we're trying to address or shortfalls we're trying to address. So perhaps it'd be helpful either from the co-chairman who identified this as an important topic, or from LSO or from stakeholders, what challenges we see with how we fund major maintenance so we can identify how to solve it in the review of how we do it. So that'd be very helpful, I think, to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So is the reason I brought this up as a topic, not only on K-12, but higher education and state buildings, is to ensure that that it is clear what major maintenance is to be used for. And as we talk about major maintenance and when it's used and how we fund it, should also be predicated on each of those facilities doing their routine maintenance. Are we doing our routine maintenance? And then when major maintenance gets to the point that then we're ready to replace through a capital construction expenditure. So if we go through the life of a building, if we build a new state hospital, we would expect that the roof on that building would last maybe 15 to 20 years. And we would expect that during that time, there'd be routine maintenance to take care of for the preservation of that component of the building. And in the funding of major maintenance, that they would be anticipating in 15 years, I'm going to have to replace a roof. Now, if the roof needs to be replaced earlier than that, why is that happening? Did you not do your routine maintenance? And if you didn't do your routine maintenance, then what burden does major maintenance have to play, or does your budget have to take up part of that as well? Then if that is all fine, we do our major maintenance, replace the roof, there's still a point to where there's going to probably be a capital construction expenditure on that. Maybe for whatever reason, it has, in the life of that building, such as the building that we're sitting in, that you've replaced the roof a number of times, but there just comes a point in the life of the building, you have to renovate and do a capital construction project. But we shouldn't put off doing major maintenance. We shouldn't put off replacing the roof so that the roof leaks, causes other peripheral damage or associated damages that then drives a capital construction event, which then is funded separately. Then that becomes a general fund expenditure and not this allocation that the executive branch or higher education or the K-12 school district has in taking care of that. So I think what we want to understand is, are our statutes clear on when and how major maintenance dollars can be used and for what purposes? And as we identified on these enhancements already on carrying over these allocations, is that the intent of the legislature? Maybe, maybe not. And so I think at the end of the day, we need to look at the statutes and the intent, starting from routine maintenance over to capital construction, and the statutes that define what is allowed and when should conform and be easily understood, even by an old fat guy like me, that this is the intent of the legislature in doing it. So then we don't put our agency, the Department of Construction, and perhaps the University of Wyoming, or there he is, Mike, or one of our school districts out here at odds with the agency saying, no, this is not what the intent of major maintenance is. And you have a district saying, oh, but indeed it is. We look at the statute and we interpret it this way. And so we want to avoid that. We want to see efficient use of our funds. and we want to maintain our buildings. I think, and so I think this whole exercise in understanding major maintenance then lets us sit back and say, okay, what we need to conform and to clarify.
And just like if the big picture, if you look at page 6, the difference of our total cost beginning and back in 2000 compared to what we're paying now. Now we're at basically a $2 billion cost on major maintenance biennial. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, it's about $300 million per biennium.
And so what we're trying to do is, because we're the Appropriations Committee, making sure we get the biggest bang for the buck and our buildings are taken care of. Simple.
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Co-Chairman, I understand the purpose of the Appropriations Committee. I'm just trying to understand what we should be focusing in on as we overview what our statutes say for major maintenance, what challenges we've experienced recently. If we think that the system is being gamed by agencies or schools by not doing major maintenance in order to do a capital construction project and letting buildings fail, which is, I'm aware of the same concerns as you are. Let's just identify, those are some of the concerns that we have heard or we're concerned about. We are evaluating the reality of those concerns, and that's why we're reviewing major maintenance. So as we review these statutes and this process, let's understand how our process currently is being gamed or used improperly. If in fact that's the case.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Let's go to.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as I see it, there are sort of 3 issues or 3 problems that we should be looking at. One of them is the one I just identified, which is when you are deciding whether to spend $1, is it better to spend the dollar on maintenance or on building new construction? You know, how do you make that decision in an organized way? And then the second is we treat school buildings differently than state buildings, and then to examine, does that make sense? And then third is just to look at other, what appear to be certain anomalies in how the formula formulas act and is the system working and how does it play out on the ground? That's how I see the goals of this from my point of view.
And theoretically, the fourth would be there's a hierarchy in major maintenance. You have fixing a leaky window versus a new paint job, or something that has more to do with decorative benefits versus maintaining the building, and a priority theoretically of what you do first with those dollars. Once again, just good management is one of those concepts that, and we'll get into more questions on that, I think, when the director comes up. Go ahead.
I think we also, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Chairman, need to be considering some, what the policy issues are for example, when we get into higher education, we build a new building. We don't start phasing in 100% of the major maintenance until year 7. We've got 7 years that this building is depreciating in its before we start funding major maintenance. I'm not sure that I'm following the logic behind that. That was a policy decision at some point, probably when we were doing a lot of building and didn't, but to assume that that nothing's happening in that building for 7 years. And so we're not giving A&I or the University of Wyoming or community colleges major maintenance on those new buildings for another, really for in total. I think in year 1, they get 0%, in year 2, they get 10%. I'm not tracking that logic. And so there may be some policy changes that we need to consider, but they certainly are policy changes, but it's warranted this time. And then on the K-12 and on all of them, we talk about vertical major maintenance, but we're not talking about parking lots, and we're not talking about the horizontal. So how do they fund major maintenance to replace a parking lot?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I have an easier question. On attachment A, section 7F, we're discussing that 10% for K through 12, but I don't see it in the community college section. Is the community college doesn't have that 10%?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, they do not.
So I think it may be useful when the director comes up to talk about differences between community colleges, UW, state, and the education. And it might even put that in a graphic of some sort so we can understand it kind of succinctly and clearly and have it explained to us. I think that would be useful. If not now, then
Mr. Chairman.
when it can happen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the question I have, it's all very prescriptive and we're trying to hone in and figure out how to exactly get what we want and not get what we don't. Is there anything in there? I'm looking at it and see it. Something, what happens when they don't? What happens if they just flat say that we're going to do something different and it's something we don't want? Is that something we take care of, or is there a mechanism somehow?
Go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, for K-12, for example, there is a provision if the expenditure was not made within the plan and within the purview of the statute as determined by the State Construction Department, they are charged with reducing the district's next year's allocation by that amount. Okay. So there is a penalty for misappropriating or misexpending those funds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further questions on the original question that was brought by the co-chair? All right, go ahead.
Well, this is kind of, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is kind of related to the good Madam Chairman's comments. In this discussion, I think it's important to ask, how do we make sure that the maintenance is done? I mean, we know it's not done if we have to go in and replace a roof early. At least we can have reasonable expectations to see where areas that could have been, actions could have been taken, I would believe. But we're talking about in this 109 section you referred to about structural systems, I think are included in there. And we've heard a lot in terms of criticisms about our systems not maybe lasting as long as they were expected. How do we QA? How do we ensure quality? I mean, that is a question more for the chairman, but you've looked at other states, and I'm really interested in knowing, how do we have processes in place to monitor the maintenance? Because it's not all about dollars, it's about the maintenance actually being done.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, and I will get to that. I think it is more appropriate for the department to respond to that. But in a evaluation of the surrounding states plus North Dakota, I would argue that Wyoming has more centralized review than any other state that I identified. So they have that second level check that is really beyond what most other states provide. I'm not saying it is successful in all cases, but the structure and framework I think is beneficial for the state of Wyoming compared to our surrounding states. Mr. Chairman, I'll try to proceed quickly through the remainder of my remarks, but I do think I will touch on a number of the items that have been discussed by the committee in this brief exchange. First of all, I'm moving now to the state. So to the chairman's comments, what's different? And there are some significant differences. So K-12 is very prescriptive. It is in statute. Community colleges is less prescriptive, but also in statute. The state and the University of Wyoming are really only subject to a Section 300 that is put in each budget bill and has very limited statutory framework for the expenditure of their major maintenance funding. So to the co-chair's comment, that may be one area you wish to determine whether or not you should codify the state and University of Wyoming's expenditure of major maintenance. Maybe you don't want to, but that's one difference. The second difference, which was alluded to by Representative Larson, is that the state, community colleges, and university is based on a 7-year phase-in. So a brand new building in K-12 immediately is available or it generates major maintenance funds, as opposed to the new law school will have to wait until 2030, 2031 before it would be eligible for full amount of major maintenance. That's a difference. The phase-in used to be in K-12 as well, and that was repealed around 2018, I believe. So the legislature made a conscious decision to make these two different systems. Obviously, the building types are different, but like K-12, there are 7 building types in the state's major maintenance and 7 different building types for higher education. Wet labs versus classrooms versus admin. And you have some similar types of buildings that are, correctional facilities are state institutions as opposed to higher ed. Higher education is not eligible for major maintenance on their enterprise facilities. So I'm thinking student residence halls or dormitories. They do not benefit from major maintenance funds. Student unions. And at least when I was over at the University of Wyoming, it was even down to the square foot that the coffee shop took in the foyer of a classroom building. If the coffee shop took 100 square feet, that was eliminated from the facility's size and is not eligible for major maintenance. So any of those enterprise facilities. Getting to also the co-chair's question, whether or not there are examples of questions, and I'm not saying this is wrong, right, or indifferent, but there are examples of both the state and K-12 wherein they come forward with component requests. This year is a great example of that, where there was a request for, in their new capital construction, was a request for a component replacement of an HVAC system at the women's prison, or a roof replacement at the women's prison. Technically, those meet the definitions of major maintenance. The state, and I'm not impugning this, it's just the facts. They have $118.9 million of cash available from prior major maintenance appropriations that has not been expended as of last Friday. Yet there are requests for $1 million for projects that would typically qualify as major maintenance. The same is true in K-12, that you have a number of school districts requesting component projects for which they would typically qualify as major maintenance. Now, maybe that is appropriate. So let me give you 2 examples. You may have a very small school district and their major maintenance payments generate $350,000 per year. It might take them 5, 6, 7 years to save up enough to replace their HVAC system, their roof, their boiler, et cetera. So they may come forward to the legislature and request a component appropriation as opposed to a major maintenance appropriation. There is also use of major maintenance for new construction. Again, I'm just pointing out the facts, not saying it's good or different, but the law school, the Fine and Performing Arts building at the University of Wyoming, this building that you are sitting in used major maintenance as a portion of its new construction. Now, there might be some, rationale or good reasons for it. The renovation of the law school, for example, also is inclusive of renovating the major systems of that building. So it would qualify for major maintenance funding, whether or not the facility was being expanded. So it's not saying that any of the actions here are nefarious or inconsistent with statute, but you do have these examples where you have major maintenance being a significant contribution to the revenue source for renovation or expansion of new facilities.
Don, before you go on, Matt, if you have a chance I'm curious what the discussion was in 2018 and when we switched the funding for major maintenance for school districts.
Mr. Chairman, I was on the select committee for school facilities, actually the chairman at the time. And the theory was there's about 28 million square feet of educational space in the state of Wyoming. There's about 5 million square feet of state buildings. So we have a lot more experience in the educational side of seeing how things deteriorate. And what we were noticing, the theory was when it was implemented, the phase in is a new building should be using routine maintenance dollars to upkeep of that facility. What we were experiencing is districts were doing very little to nothing during that first 7 years. And so then at year 7, when 100% was available, then the building was almost behind the 8 ball in terms of its maintenance. That was district-led decisions, but we started to notice that this is not benefiting the state in preserving our assets to the greatest extent possible. So the decision was made and put forward to the legislature that if we allowed them to count those dollars for 100% of major maintenance from day one, then they would utilize more money on the facility for the routine maintenance to make sure that it was always kept up to snuff, I guess was the rationale at that time. Why we haven't changed it for state and higher education buildings, I couldn't answer that question. Probably makes sense from the same rationale of how to remove that phase-in period.
So I do have a question then for the director. When I'm curious if we've been able to, now that it's been 5 years, 6 years, if in fact we see a difference in the routine maintenance and major maintenance for the quality of the buildings. I mean, in other words, that was the thought. Is it working? And is it something that we ought to, if we haven't, ought to evaluate, find out if it's working? Number two, I'd like to know how much it cost us when we did that, what that turned into in terms of overall cost within schools. And then whether or not you have an opinion if that's something we should do with the state or UW or other. All right, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, just 2 more categories here in a short presentation. On page 6, I wanted to talk about table 1, which is the history of all major maintenance appropriations since inception. And I wanted to point out a handful of observations. First, on the far right hand side, the multiplier, you will see the first 4 years under K-12, it bounced around a bit. You can kind of see that it was a system in its infancy, and it took a while to stabilize. But ever since 2003, by statute, the multiplier has remained constant for K-12 at 2%. The state's multiplier, and this state's multiplier also applies to higher education, community colleges, and the University of Wyoming, is not in statute. And you can see that that has bounced around dependent upon availability of resources, quite frankly. So this last session, you added additional funds to major maintenance for all entities, and you can see the average has eclipsed 2%. And you can see it's eclipsed 2% in 2007 and 8 as well. So in the good times, the state has set aside a larger proportion of funds for major maintenance. In the more lean times, 2021, 2022, our COVID budgets, if you will, you can see that that is an area where you tighten the belt a bit. The next thing worth mentioning is the historic total amount appropriated for the executive branch on the far left column after the biennium. You can see the state has received $324 million. Of that amount, as I mentioned previously, $119 million remains in cash. So about 37% of total appropriations made in the past 20 years have not yet been spent. Now, some of that was just appropriated 3 months ago. So of course it hasn't been spent, but there are historic appropriations from prior biennia also unexpended. That does not mean that they don't have plans for them, that they may even be encumbered, that they may have earmarked them, but they do remain unspent.
And Don, those are kept where?
Excuse me?
Where is the money?
Mr. Chairman, it is invested in the state agency pool. Yeah. And K-12, you have a similar experience. So over the last 7 years, they have $155 million. Their money is invested locally. So the school districts have this fund. So we have less of a window into their cash balances, but we do know that they have a cash balance most recently reported of $155 million just in the last 7 years. which gives me roughly the same percentage. About 30% of the appropriated money at the district level also remains unspent. Now, there are two competing priorities here, and I've never heard, I know, from my service in the legislature staff as to which prevails, but there is one argument that I have heard, or rationale, that says districts and the state should be setting aside funds for anticipating major maintenance, roof replacements, HVAC systems in future years. So this expenditure is not only expected, it was intended. A different school of thought is, and I've heard this by members of the Appropriations Committee, we appropriate this money not so it sits in a checking account, but for it to get out on the street to address maintenance issues, deferred maintenance issues, to avoid catastrophic issues in the future. That tension has never been identified which one is. So if you're a school district or a community college out there, there is no strict guidance as to which of those two school of thoughts they should follow. There have also been a whole host of competing interests, and those are all listed in the footnotes here. But just to run through some examples, there are issues of the day, is what I call them, fire suppression systems, whether or not state parks is a separate allocation or just an allocation within the states, whether community college facilities that are constructed with local funds should or should not be eligible for major maintenance. Those are kind of competing issues of the day over the last 20 years. I would conclude my comments by mentioning other states. And there is a table on page 8, table 2, which summarizes a short survey of our neighboring states plus North Dakota. And I would note that Wyoming generally has a favorable system. Most states do allocate major maintenance funds, but not all. So there are some states, North Dakota is a great example, does not appropriate funds for major maintenance. And Wyoming would have been in that category back in the 1990s. And we, as a state, generated a substantial amount of deferred maintenance when we fell into that category. Most, well, actually half are formula-based, and they use, generally speaking, the same inputs we have, total square footage and replacement cost. But there are about half that are ad hoc, where each individual agency actually makes a submission of a list, not formula-based. And I think reading the literature that the formula-based is much more of a best practice than the ad hoc agency request.
Go ahead.
John? So on this, the state buildings, the executive branch assets, if we compare that to what we do in community colleges, the community college has a commission that reviews the properties, and then they bring that to, if they need to renovate or do a capital construction project to upgrade that building. In our Capcom bill, same, we have the similar exercise on the school side. Do we have anything on where A&I brings us list, says this is our priority, these are our buildings, and this one's in need of this, and we need, how does that process work?
Mr. Chairman, I think the state construction department does bring forward every quarter a list by agency to the State Building Commission, which reviews not only the ongoing projects, but the completed major maintenance projects and the proposed future major maintenance projects. About half of all states and the North Dakota have no reversion, but there are half that really do require that major maintenance funds revert in 2 years or 5 years. The legislature, like Wyoming, does not typically get involved in the prioritization of each individual project. That seems to be the norm. And Wyoming is more centralized in that there are states that have agencies have a lot more flexibility and less oversight from the office of the architect or a state construction equivalent on their expenditure of funds. Wyoming is the only state of these that has oversight of K-12 major maintenance funds. We have a state-centered system as a result of the Campbell and Waschke decisions. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my remarks and mention a couple of policy considerations pursuant to the co-chair's comments. The committee wished to codify section 313 in the budget bill into statute. You may wish to consider whether aligning definitions, and the definition of major maintenance is slightly different between the K-12 side and the state side. You may wish to provide some direction as to whether or not recipients should save for replacement of major systems or should spend them on a routine basis. Some direction as to whether or not component projects are appropriate or not. These are just potential areas of policy inquiry. Based upon conversations in the State Select Committee on School Facilities this year and prior years, you may wish to determine whether or not the percentage is correct, whether the funding of excess space is accurate, and whether the funding of phase-in, meaning the phase-in on new buildings, is appropriate. All of these decisions do lend themselves to inherent incentives upon the recipient entities, the districts, the community colleges, and to ensure that the state's interests are being met. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will conclude my remarks. And
So Don, I think it might be useful with the list you just went through. Just send that to us via email and point by point. So just so we have it in front of us.
Mr.
I
Chairman,
can't
I
write
will-
that fast. Okay, questions for Don? Any questions? All right. Perfect timing. Next, got Jerry, I believe. Come on up, Jerry. Suzanne and Valerie, welcome. I know that you have nothing else to do today, so.
Your chair, Madam Co-Chair, and committee, thank you for allowing us to be here today. You know, when we got, I'm glad to hear these conversations. I can tell you, I've been here 2 years. Even just major maintenance, I'm trying to, you know, get with Valerie on how it rolls out on schools and Suzanne and how it all works and what about community colleges versus colleges. And it's
Jerry, could you
confusing.
pull that mic a little closer.
I'm sorry. And it's been confusing to figure out and a learning curve the last couple of years. Let me start off, Jerry Vincent, Director of the State Construction Department. For any part of this that's K-12, we have Valerie Hughes, our School Facilities Division Administrator. And then as we move over into any state conversations, we have Suzanne Norton, who is our Construction Management Division Administrator, and Mr. Dave Webb, who is our Construction Supervisor on the CMD side. We came ready. We gave some materials that might trigger some questions to be asked, but we're basically here to give you our input or answer what we can or come back with any other additional information on all this that's being discussed right now. I think these are good conversations. I appreciate wanting to, Senator Nevica trying to hone in on what the key ones are, because there's a lot here and we could drop down any rabbit hole pretty quickly. But I also agree with what Don has put forth as things for this body to consider. And when the time's right, I have maybe 2 or 3 others that I'd like to add that you might want to consider as well. And I can begin with those, or we can just start taking questions based on what's been brought up so far.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So on our K-12 side of the house, something to take a look at, we currently fund based on average daily membership. So when you're taking a look at a building was 100,000 square feet, it had 400 kids back in the day, and it has 200 kids in it today. So they get 50% of the building, that roof, whatever it is, in theory, formulaically, can be renovated. And we believe that can be problematic for the districts. we know that you are the appropriators and the dollar has to stretch across the state entirely. So I know what I'm saying when I say that we believe both sides of the house are not funded accordingly regarding major maintenance, that they're underfunded.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up on that question, based on your example, that it was so big and held 400 kids and now it holds 200 kids.
Mhm.
Your theory, though, is, or the reason you think a change ought to take place and the ADM be removed is because the size of the building has not changed. The roof is still the same size, whether there's 400 kids as originally anticipated or 2 kids in the building. The roof is still the same size and going to leak at some point. Is that kind of why you think the ADM should be removed, because the size hasn't changed?
Mr. Chair, Representative Walters, that's exactly it. Yeah, I am a former school district executive. And I will tell you that I will be faced with decisions on that 100,000 square feet, either rob from some other project to do it correctly, or I will start looking at a repair instead of replace, or possibly a roof replace, but not a tear off and get the substrate. So I'm good for a full 30 years on that. I'm going to have to make decisions, you know, when that kind of a funding occurs on that item. And I think I understand how it came to be, but I'm also looking at the cost of construction and the cost of renovation. I'm looking at amount of contractors, subcontractors in Wyoming preference. I think it's difficult to get there these days.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Vincent, then would this funding formula then also have led to this anomaly where we then fund a component in our CapCon bill, which would normally have been a major maintenance expenditure? You may have this same school that now is not generating enough major maintenance dollars to replace a system, which is by definition a major maintenance. And we're asking the question, why are we funding that in CapCon rather than that being a major maintenance expense to the district? The district may be coming back and saying, well, we're not generating enough revenue. We don't have enough major maintenance dollars to do it. The system is failing. Hence, we now have it in a CapCon bill. Am I seeing that accurately?
Mr. Chair, Representative Larson, I believe so. I think the other reason for the components, and Valerie can speak to it, is exactly what Don brought up. Whether it's ADM driven or square foot driven on that dollar for that roof, they're just not generating enough money, you know, with the size of their district to take on a $1.5 million roof or HVAC system. So it doesn't help if you're getting money based on an ADM. That's not helping the situation. But some of those folks are in that component list just because they're not ever going to get there with the projects that come up versus.
Mr. Chairman.
And then
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Valerie, if I could maybe pick on you, when we see this anomaly that we're kind of referring to using the component part, do you see that in our small rural schools, or are we seeing that, or maybe we're not seeing it at all, or do we see it in our larger schools? Is it kind of focused one way or the other, in your opinion?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I would say that you could have that scenario in both instances. A small district that's roughly about an hour and a half from here, they had roughly 4 component projects this last year. That equated to about $10 million that they are getting in HVAC replacement. 4 different schools, 4 different HVAC systems, but they only generate and receive about 1.5 million per fiscal year in major maintenance. So to do just those HVAC systems, they would have had to save for a number of years in order to do it, but that would be the only maintenance that they could do on those facilities. They wouldn't be able to do anything else. You have the same instance kind of going on in larger districts as well, in terms of larger districts may have more number of buildings and the larger number of roofs or HVACs or things along those lines, where the 115% of allowable, which takes into account the ADM there, it's still not going to be enough for them to maintain all of the facilities that they have and do some of those major components. They have a better chance of doing some of those as long as the planning is there.
So just to follow up on that, just 1 second. I mean, the logic of it is pretty simple. If, you know, the ADM argument that you just presented, to me, we need to see what's really happening on the ground. In other words, how many schools and school buildings have less students than they had in historically, and where is that impact? You know, because is it because they're older schools? Is it because, you know, because now on new schools, we have a kind of a standardized size of classroom space in our school designs. So where do we see those dropping populations? Like, I just take Lander, for example. The largest graduating class ever in Lander was mine, 1976. So that their population for K through 12 is going down, even though their population of the town itself is probably about the same. It fluctuates, but there's just less kids in school. And so how are we seeing that fluctuation impact? I think statistically, we need to know what that impact is. And the counter of this argument, if we do that, if we go to ADMs, then does it make more sense to ease up on that immediate payment of major maintenance and make it more consistent with what we do with other schools? Because we're still balancing dollars out. And, you know, what's the most logical way to go about doing it, and having real data on, you know, one example of the school an hour and a half from here is useful, but it's anecdotal. And it seems to me that we have to have real data to make that kind of assessment. And it'd be nice to know, if we get rid of the ADMs, then, and go back to are just a number of the size of the buildings, what's the economic impact of that? If we incorporate that, and, you know, if we take a step, we want to know what's going to happen.
Mr. Chairman, I would direct the committee to take a look at, there's some pages within the packet that was provided. At the top, it says major component and system recommended repairs by building by year. That is to give you an idea of actual data and actual cost of repairs projected out for a 10-year period, for the next 10-year period, to say that based on the assessment that was just completed, these are the recommended repairs for those next 10 years. And so that would be everything from your roof to your electrical, to your sewage, your plumbing, anything along those lines. So I've kind of shortened it a little bit here, because I could certainly break it out further to those particular systems, but this is to give you an idea by district, the magnitude of the dollars that we're talking about for repairs. And then kind of in the packet also, it's kind of a big picture across the board. Is from a top level view, there is a handout that's called School Facilities Major Maintenance Payment Expenditure and Balance for fiscal year 17 through 23. And that's to give you that idea on the top level of how much do districts each receive, how much are they spending, how much are they carrying over. But that coupled with the other enclosure, the major maintenance expenditures by building FY17 through FY22, that's to say where they're spending dollars. So these are meant, even though they're kind of separate sheets, it's all meant to work together to give that big picture to say, here's how much districts are receiving. But if you're looking forward into the future, here's how much they're actually going to need to do those repairs. And keep in mind, this doesn't take into account whether or not there is a major renovation that is necessary. So capital construction is given for those, or if there is the instance that it makes more sense to actually demolish and rebuild a building. So this is just purely on repairs.
And so I think it would be helpful to, this is based upon the consultant that just finished his report recently. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
And tell us who that was, what they were hired to do, and how friendly it was up in Gillette a week or two ago.
Mr. Chairman, the firm that was selected is Bureau Veritas. They're nationally known, or nationally, sorry, they're a national firm here. They've worked with a ton of different school districts, municipalities, states, all across the board. So we hired them to go out and essentially do the facility condition assessment. So that's just a pure looking at what those major components and systems are in every single building, and logging kind of what where they're at in their life cycle, and also how they're working, right? If districts gave information to say, well, yes, that's, a newer component or system, but we've had to replace this particular, part on it on a monthly basis. It's one of those to say that the life cycle is going to be modified in that instance. It's not going to last as long. So they went out, they did that. They actually layered on unit costs. So for the actual cost for that actual component or system, for the exact repair that's being recommended. And those unit costs were actually, we specifically requested that they reach out to local contractors to make sure that those unit costs were what we're seeing in Wyoming and the different areas in Wyoming. So this is what they did is they put together all of the data for actual cost of repairs for each component and system based upon what they're recommending and when they are recommending it going into the future. And then that in relation to its current replacement value generates an FCI score. And that FCI score is essentially just an indicator to say, okay, we've got X percentage of major components and systems in this building that are coming due for repair or replacement because of their life cycle. When you start to get into a 30% or 0.3, you're looking at 30% of your major components and systems in a building that are going to need repair or replacement. At that point, the conversation may turn to, okay, does it make sense to actually do a larger scale renovation of that building? And then when you're talking about getting to a 0.6 or 60% of your components and systems failing within that building, does it make more sense at that point to put the dollars towards a new build? So it's this data in that snapshot that's called major component and system recommended repairs by building by year. That is the direct result of what this assessment, some of the data that this assessment resulted in.
So,
Okay, Representative Stiff.
Mr.
Sorry to
Chairman.
jump in front of you.
no, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. And it looks like on the very last page of that recommended assessment, there's some kind of eye-popping numbers. Like, this year it's 75 million, next year it's 86 million, but then it jumps way up to over $200 million in 2025. Then a couple of years after that, it's at $300 million a year. I guess if pointing to, what look like sort of dire needs for maintenance. So help me with if there's such a demand for the maintenance, why do the school districts in the aggregate across the state have so much money in the bank, right? I mean, if there's so many needs, why do they have $155 million just sitting there? You'd think that they would be burning it really quickly. So if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, I think there's a couple, there's some different answers for that, and it just depends on the district. Take, for instance, I know we've got a smaller district in the northeast corner that's going to have replace 4 boilers in the near future. So they're essentially building up their dollars to go ahead and be able to afford those repairs. So they're keeping money and they're trying to bank it because there isn't a guarantee, right, for component funding coming through, or they're not going to fall into a capital construction remedy. You've got other districts across the state who have millions of dollars sitting there, and they're talking about some of these major components and systems and buildings. However, they're not spending it. And we as a Department of Division don't necessarily have the ability to direct exactly where those dollars are going. So component funding, component system is kind of, I call it or refer it as that gap, but it's actually an intended purpose, and those dollars get funded for that exact system or component. And in that case, it's kind of upholding what it is as a state you're looking to have done with those major maintenance dollars, right? You're directing it for those specific purposes, whereas districts right now have the latitude to choose. So maybe there's a happy medium in between.
Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
Mr. Chair. I just want to get through the 2 or 3 additional recommendations, and then we can go down into any one of these. So the 2 years that I've been here, I hear we don't have the kind of money we used to have. We're not doing new schools 5 a year, every single year. We don't have that kind of money. So I'm asking that maybe ADM take a look at it, because we need to protect the existing assets that are there. And if ADM per formula is allowing part of something to be refurbished. Maybe there's a story there. The others,
Before you go on, so for us to do that, I think we need to go back to the kind of the questions I was asking. So what I'd like you to do is put together just kind of an outline of the issue, the dollars it's going to cost, and kind of put it down into something that's right in front of us on each of your requests, so that we can study it and review it, bring you back probably a couple, in our next couple of meetings as we move forward, and we'll kind of step through it, because obviously it's a lot of homework that we're going to have to do to
yes.
and anyway.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, we're meeting with you today, but really we would start taking this through the commission and select committee.
Yeah.
And then to yourself, if we're meeting with you today, that's where we're bringing it up. So we
Well,
do
yeah,
exactly.
and we want to help you. So,
Right. So the second one I would bring up is the 2% or that's currently being funded in a good year. I think a report 6 or 7 years ago said maybe that should be 2.56. Another study could be done. I don't know that the money needs to be spent. I think to take that into consideration, that if we are more in a protection of existing asset and we don't have the kind of money to knock all schools down and build new, that we should be trying to turn the life cycle back on the ones that we have. So maybe look at that 2%, and I would say it's on the state level as well, not just a school. The third that I wanted to bring up carefully. On the K-12 side, the definition of major maintenance says repair, replace. And there are situations where districts get stuck in between. And I would ask that, and even like I said, through commission select, that it be considered, but I wouldn't want to open a whole door. I think maybe the department can approve on a one-off basis. Let me give you an example. We toured a school last summer. And for all kinds of good reasons, they turned around the school facility and orientated a different direction. Parking, safety, what have you. The way it used to be, had this covered overhang, snow, rain, kids wait for parents, parents wait to pick up kid. And on the new one, you just walk right out the door and there you are. So they wanted to do some sort of covered overhang in there. Major maintenance says no, because it's repair, replace. There isn't a minor capital program anymore. And so what does that look like? So I think when those come about, that I think that maybe our agency can take a look at those. If there was some more latitude in there, I don't want to open that up to do whatever. As a former school district person, we will do all kinds of nice to have and good to have things. And then we're going to run out of money and we're going to be coming through us or the commissioner or someone else for emergency. But I do think that we do have situations like that where they do run into those situations, and maybe that's even the kind of component thing that we're talking about.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Director Vincent, I want to make sure I'm tracking with you. So when you talk about the example of the minor new construction, or you say use major maintenance dollars to accomplish that, or would that come through a CapCon request? And if you're thinking the latter, I think they have the ability to do that now. So if you just clarify.
Yeah, thank you. It's not so much the latter. It's the first. If there is discretion through our agency to take a look at those kind of situations and or in our component funding, that we there's a very hard and fast repair replace.
So again, I think to better understand the problem and the need for it, we need more than just an anecdotal explanation.
I understand. Okay. And then lastly, it's just more of a comment. The schools, and the reason for the looking at ADM, look at the 2%, just as recent as 2015, an elementary school new cost $15 million, and now they're over 30. So you can surmise that a new middle, when it comes along, is 40 to 60, and a new high is 100 million. So if we can take care of what we have, right, and in terms of and start thinking about major renovation, reconstruction, and additions more along the line of a new schools coming off the lot every day, that would be something that I think that we should be thinking about. And that sets a tone for even the new schools that are being built, just for this body to understand, they're not being built like they were 40, 50 years ago. You can go into a school that has a terrazzo floor from 60 years ago and it looks brand new right now. So those kind of things are leading to, when we had discussion earlier, heard someone bring up routine maintenance and what are we doing about routine maintenance on the K-12 side and really on the state side, we have less involvement on routine maintenance. And, but I will tell you that they will wear out sooner than the ones that were built previously. And when they do, when you go back to the major maintenance dollar, most of the equipment that are in these now is all technological. It's all driven through technology, and there's a higher cost to replace when the systems do in fact go down. And that's not looking for an action on that. This is kind of a more of a truism and food for thought. Go ahead.
Director Vincent, do we see these systems that are being driven by technology having the same life cycle, or are we seeing the life cycle shorter?
Well, I believe life cycle shorter. But I would say we can look into that, but I would say it's at least the same, but I would believe shorter. The discussion that we've had from both sides of the house is what do we use? We don't have anyone who knows how to do this. So the training, we turn over a facility, we have training. It's not extensive. It's not forever. The current folks don't know how to use these things. And so are we allowed to outsource for someone to work on this? And that is not in the major maintenance, definition right now to be able to do that. And perhaps it's in routine maintenance if there's money right now. So just sharing some of the comments out that we hear.
Mr. Chairman, I believe it is. I think routine in major maintenance talks about that being done by in-house, let's say for in those unique circumstances, and it uses an elevator as the example, but I think that's only example to say if there are systems that you don't have training for, that it would be done outside, right?
Mr. Chairman. Director Vincent, I have a question on this very helpful list about major maintenance expenditures by school district. What's interesting to me is it looks like there are some pretty small dollar amounts that are listed there. So for one school district, you have a line item for $341, another one $69. That doesn't sound like major maintenance. So is the major and major maintenance a misnomer? Is this just maintenance?
Actually, I'm going to, Mr. Chair, Representative Stiff, I'll let Valerie cover that. I think by definition, if it's not routine maintenance, it's not CapCon, it's major maintenance. I mean, I think that's the definition we fall into. But is that what you're referring? I understand the question.
Mr. Director, I mean, if it's $306, and that's like fixing an electrical outlet or maybe the P-trap in a sink or something, it doesn't sound like major maintenance. There's several what appear to be really small dollar items, which are fine, but it looks like they're not replacing a boiler. They're not replacing an HVAC system or replacing a roof. It looks like just what we would think of as maintenance.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative, sorry, I was thinking 306,000, so I missed that. So I missed the connection you're having there. But you want to go through some of what our smaller districts and smaller asks are, Valerie?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith. So right now it's anything that the districts submit through work orders. They submit it in the statewide database, and our project managers are reviewing whatever gets submitted against what major maintenance is laid out for in statute. And so in these cases, regardless of the dollar value, there isn't a threshold necessarily for the dollar value. It's just simply whether or not it actually meets that statutory definition or purpose for use. So in another, on the other end of it, so they'll submit what they're intending to use or what they're intending to do. It may not be the full scope of a project use of major maintenance dollars. And so it's one of those that, again, the dollar value, there's not a threshold for it, but when they actually come back and reconcile with us once each year is when we find out what the actual expenditure was. But right now if it meets the definition of major maintenance, then our project managers are allowing that work order to proceed, which is why you're seeing dollar values across the board. We can dig deeper into some of these smaller amounts if we need to, but it has to meet the definition. And we actually do track all of this. So if there's a particular one, it's for every single district, we have down to In this case, I'll give you an example here on the screen. For one district, they actually replaced partitions, and that has a $560 total assigned to it. So.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are we kind of to a general question point? My general question is, I believe on the state side, you track routine maintenance for a program called AIM or something similar, so that you can sort of see what a facility has done in terms of routine maintenance to see if the reason the boiler failed early was because of lack of routine maintenance or some other issue within it, or roof, or pick the system. On the school side, you don't really have an ability to track what the routine maintenance was to then determine if the major maintenance expenditure is in line with what it is. Do you think it would be beneficial to the state and overall cost savings to the state if there was a system to track routine maintenance on the school side so that we didn't get into higher major maintenance expenditures? And follow up to that, are there programs that would allow us to do that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, I think that overall, yes, right. It's important to track whether or not routine maintenance is being done on all of these components and systems throughout a building, or in just a building envelope as a whole. It all plays into each other. But right now, you're correct. On the K-12 side, we as the state construction department don't track routine maintenance. That comes in the form of the block grant versus the funding through our department. And so we track major maintenance and what's going on there, but we don't for the routine maintenance. AIM, or the statewide database, it actually has the capability to expand upon and track to a further degree what we are tracking. And in some different ways, we could set up or spend dollars to actually have some additional modifications made within the system if that was the direction of the state. I believe it has the capability to do something like that.
So to follow up on that, what is the practice in the school districts? I presume most of them have some type of a major maintenance or a routine maintenance log. And is there a problem out there? Is there something that needs to be fixed?
Mr. Chairman, I've heard that districts use something called School Dude. There's probably multiple others out there. And then what practice they actually use, whether it's some system such as that, or whether it's a Excel spreadsheet, I can't confirm.
Well, the question then, the follow-up question is there a problem? In other words, for example, when we just had that statewide assessment, I presume they go in and ask about their routine maintenance, or they can see if there's a problem, if there isn't a problem. Is that something that that we're cognizant?
Mr. Chairman, if districts were willing to give that information over to the assessor, then yes, it was something that was shared. But I would say if we're seeing a system or component failing before the end of its life cycle, that would kind of be an indicator for us, right? If it's going into the realm of the need for a full repair or replacement, then in that case, the question would be, was routine maintenance done on it, for it to have the extent of its life, or was it not, or did it matter? What type of system was it? Is it something that particular unit is not lasting? There's all those different factors.
Okay. Go ahead. Yep. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that response. That's very interesting. What it caused me to think, though, is do we have anything in place that helps us understand, are we making the best use of the technology that's available? I mean, you talk about a parameter of years for a facility, but as we go forward, the technology changes. So what do we have in place? Are we using technology to help us in the maintenance area to monitor systems? For example, utility bill could be used when you have an excessive amount of water, perhaps related to a toilet that's running, that kind of thing. But there's other more sophisticated technologies available that I'm aware of. But are we using those in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I'm not sure. That would be more along the lines of, I think, kind of amongst each district on whether or not they're using software such as that.
Follow up.
Go ahead.
So is that an area that could have potential, getting more bang for the buck opportunity for Wyoming? If we looked into some of the technologies of the software or I don't want this to be considered a nasty thing, but AI. I mean, there are rural, I'm particularly concerned about not just the rural areas, but the smaller schools within the bigger districts that may be, holding back because they don't have the wherewithal to make this issue known. And so then we're sort of defaulting to a leave it to fail kind of a component setup, right? Like a roof or a structural system.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I see the value in it. I agree with you. There could be some value there, but I think that it would take some modifications with how this program is run currently in order to kind of set something up like that. That's kind of a technological system that's essentially saying and scheduling out into the future, saying this is how much you're spending for this. It's time to replace things along those lines. I think that's more of a sophisticated system, but it would also probably take some other changes to how this structure is.
Final follow-up.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is it possible that we may have the capabilities that are being used in larger districts that we could help out our smaller rural neighbors districts in terms of software or bidding on contracts and, providing the volume that Wyoming brings to the table to make arrangements for maintenance?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, yes, that's probably a true statement. I don't know, like I said, everything that all the districts are using, but do I think that some of them are more sophisticated than others? Absolutely.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Valerie, I want to go back to Representative Stiss. Comments or questions on some of these smaller amounts approved for major maintenance and see if I want to see if I can give you an example, see if I'm seeing accurately. So if we talk about the term of major maintenance it's for the system or the components within that system. And so it seems to me that then the question is what's routine maintenance and what's major maintenance. And so for an example, I might use is in an HVAC system, routine maintenance would clearly be to change the filters on a periodic as specified. But you may have a fan motor go out. That by definition is a component of the system and may only cost $150, $200, but it's a component of that system. And by definition would fall under major maintenance. And so that would be allowed, but the filters would be considered to be routine maintenance. Am I kind of seeing that? Do I have my head around that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? Jerry, go ahead. And/or Valerie.
If there are any further questions on K-12, otherwise we'd like to discuss a little bit about our state side of the house.
Please proceed.
All right. So as mentioned before, we have Ms. Suzanne Norton, Administrator for the Construction Management Division. And I think Suzanne, in the same context of what's being talked about right now, if there's an overview of how we first meet with agencies, how we learn what their major maintenance needs are, if you could walk us through that, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Suzanne Norton, Administrator for Construction Management. Since you might recall, we used the Construction Management Division was formerly part of the Department of Administration and Information. And in 2016, when we combined, we gained the ability to have the planning staff that were already familiar with facility plans with the districts. And so we began that process with every agency in a more formal way than we had done in previous years. And in time, we've grown and expanded and developed the information that we're gathering. And one big difference between when construction management was A&I is that we were directly related with at least general services, preventative and routine maintenance for all space owned by A&I, which includes all of the buildings in Cheyenne, now the Thyra Thompson building, not at that time, obviously, and the Rockwell building in Cheyenne, as well as the Geological Survey building in Laramie. Those buildings are monitored and maintained through the same statewide database. Work orders are entered by building occupants for miscellaneous needs, but then also all of the assets, the building assets are captured in that system. And by assets, I mean every mechanical equipment, every light fixture, everything is captured. And A&I does do a very judicious job of scheduling their preventive maintenance using that technology. In 2022, the State Building Commission modified their rules for the first time since 1997. And one of the primary reasons for that rule revision was to allow the State Building Commission to have better oversight over statewide facilities in a way that did not exist before, had never really been captured since the change in governments from the facilities that belong to the Board of Charities and Reform, for example, to collect that information. We are doing that now in the facility plans. We are just compiling the information that was gathered in May. There are some agencies, smaller agencies, that it doesn't really seem, the technology can be a very large investment. So they are using spreadsheets and just manual ways of tracking their preventative and routine maintenance. Again, A&I uses that system called AIM or Operate. That's a database. And we do use that same database. It's still in a process of ramping on and gathering information of square footages. And so some of the agencies still have manual calculations for the major maintenance calculation. But we are getting closer in that facility planning process and the AIM system for statewide facilities. But again, just to clarify, Representative Walters, many of the agencies, we're trying to gather information about their staffing and funding for preventative and routine maintenance, but it's generally not under our purview. But we do believe it's one of the more important things, because preventative and routine maintenance, if it's not done, then it becomes major maintenance. And if major maintenance is not done, then it becomes CapCon.
So just to follow up on that, do we have a list of who is or is not up to speed on AIM and how they've the process? I mean, that's something that we could put our hand in if we need to.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we in this last facility plan, we asked every agency, everyone to answer that question. We have not compiled the facility plans yet.
So I presume, though, you've had discussions with the Chief Executive's office to get cooperation from the various agencies to participate to the full extent?
Mr. Chairman, they were all very cooperative. The revision in the facility plan based on that rule change took a while, took a lot of effort to compile it and to justify it, to explain it to everyone. When you have new personnel coming on, it's nice to explain the who, what, when, where, why, and how long, so they all understand, but everyone was very cooperative. And also that there were some discussions in, wouldn't it make sense if everyone had a login to the state system? So that's something we're thinking about and talking about, and what would it cost? And
So the question is there a problem that needs to be fixed?
Mr. Chairman, I think so. I think it's likely that we need to better understand if every agency has enough staff to do the preventative maintenance of the facilities that they are responsible for. I think some of them run a very lean agencies. And then I was hoping in the information that we're gathering that I might be able to do like a square footage calculation for how many square feet each agency has and how they calculate what they request in their budgets for preventative. And we just haven't gotten into those details of the information that was gathered in May, and everybody is always gun shy about asking for increases to their budget. So that could be the problem,
Representative Larson.
if it exists.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Suzanne, we kind of have a unique beast where you evolved in Department of A&I and now are on your own. So can you help us understand with those two agencies on the state building, who's responsible for routine and major maintenance and who's responsible for capital construction?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, General Services Division within A&I is 100% responsible for preventative and routine maintenance. And they do track all of that information in the AIM database software, and they have competent and diligent staff that schedule those.
And I think, Mr. Chairman, as that has evolved, we've identified a couple of statutes that were maybe a little less clear than needed to be last year to help define the role of A&I and Department of Construction, and then some routine maintenance definitions and stuff like that we put in a bill last year. It didn't get heard. We refiled that to get clear this year, talking about there's some things, but we needed to put a little more definition to clearly separate the responsibilities on capital construction being with this agency and major maintenance, routine maintenance being with Department of A&I directors. That I think we come to a good resolution. We just didn't get the time to get that bill through last year.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Larson, we're working with A&I through the one-offs and through regular process, and it's far better than it was a year and a half ago. We were hoping that language would hit the floor so it could kind of codify some things, because there's still some squishy areas that each of us are doing that maybe we shouldn't, but we're trying to make that work on behalf of the agency. So we hope that can get back on the floor. And Mr. Chair, to your comment about is it working, I can tell you that 2 years ago, when procurement for major maintenance and Capcom was moved over to our agency, we have started to engage with a lot of the agencies, but two larger ones where why is this always coming at the last minute? And a lot of that was working with them going and exploring that, you know what, I don't know if our CMMS system, our tracking system for routine maintenance and major maintenance is catching enough things. And that's why it's coming here for a whole nother reason, aside from the major maintenance conversation. They both have taken dramatic changes and steps to get into what we don't track and do early as it's coming to you very late in the game over here. So from their willingness and participation, we think those two have been very successful.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, a little follow-up on the major maintenance portion. Those funds are appropriated to construction management. And then we work with every different agency in the approval of their submitted projects for major maintenance, and then procurement as needed. Each agency that we work with have different levels of facility and construction management staff. Historically, A&I has had the facility manager run projects and so on. And then military department, for example, has a really robust staff. So they mostly take care of most of their project management on their own. There are other agencies where we have staff that oversee major maintenance and CapCon for agencies. So it just depends on the staffing and the capability level that each project requires and each agency might need.
Okay, please proceed. Anything else?
Chairman,
Go ahead.
Question for Ms. Norton or Mr. Webb. During Mr. Richards' presentation, he discussed how approximately a third of the major maintenance budget is showing in the system as unexpended. Valerie explained on the school side why that might be. Could you explain on the state side why that might show up in the state system? I know there's a great reason for it, but maybe share why that would look the way it does.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, our figures do agree with Mr. Richards. And each agency does have quite a backlog of projects that they've asked for our approval on. Those approvals have been given. And for whatever reason, each appropriation is distributed or allocated per the square footage that each facility is assigned to. So it's not a large pool of money theoretically, where each agency has their unobligated amounts. We can see that there are agencies such as fire prevention and electrical safety earns about $100,000 a biennium. So while not significant, that amount isn't enough to do a lot of large projects. For example, we're going to do a re-roofing project there on their administration and classroom facility, and that is closer to $1 million. So we'll be needing to use the contingency amount that we reserve to facilitate that project. Generally, agencies may not have a lot of staff, or we do run into a lot of occasions where once a project is designed and put out for bid, sometimes there are no bids. We had one in Riverton that happened a couple of weeks ago where there are no bids. So then it takes additional effort and backlog. I think I'd like Dave to speak a little bit to
Somebody's passing notes.
and he's very informed on all of our agencies.
Mr. Chairman, Dave Webb, State Construction Manager Supervisor. In 2020, we had a hold on projects, so we didn't do any projects over $100,000. If they wanted to request an exception, they had to send a letter into our department, which was then again passed on to the governor's office for approval. That's been rescinded now, and we have this backlog that created a huge backlog of projects. So we have about three bienniums back. And so we just cleared up the 17 appropriation, 17-18 biennium appropriation. So there's nothing in that account anymore. We're utilizing old money first to fund the projects or pay for those projects. And so you'll see we haven't expended any funds in the 2022, 2023 bienniums, but that's because we're utilizing those funds that are in that 18, 19, the 20, 21 funding years. Other than that, I mean, they're expending funds as fast as possible. I think we spent 10 million so far from last July.
Mr. Chairman, since last July, it's 12.5 million that we've spent, and that is up from $6 and $7 million in the previous two fiscal years.
We're utilizing the funding as fast as possible. We're getting those projects out. They're getting done. And you got to remember, these are major maintenance projects. So a Capcom project of $12 million is one project. This is probably a couple hundred projects with the limited staff that we have.
So when you say there's a backlog, tell us what it is and what's your anticipation to catch up?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. That is a real good question, because when it comes to backlog, it becomes deferred maintenance and then something else happens. So we're trying to utilize that money as priorities, not just priority, but we're also utilize those as emergencies. So we're seeing more emergent projects now than we have in the past. And we're trying to play catch up and do the emergencies at the same time. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get that backlog even close to where it's in the biennium behind the previous biennium.
So it sounds like we are the problem in part.
Well, there again, you have a limited amount of contractors, you have a limited amount of staff. You're going to have that backlog. I mean, even if we pushed out, we were in the year that we were appropriated in, I still think you would have a backlog of onesies, twosies, maybe a 10 project backlog because of just the number of contractors that are available to us in Wyoming.
So I'll turn to you, Director. Do you have enough staff to keep up?
Mr. Chair, I would have said that to be true up until we got down to legislative session this year. And what's hitting our plates right now is overwhelming. There's hardly a person who's going home at 5 p.m. right now.
So I didn't really get an answer. Do you have a proposal for catching up on the backlog, or as part of the problem is that we don't have the staffing in-house, or do we not have sufficient contractors, or is it all?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think it's multifaceted, and then I'm not trying to avoid an answer. I just want to give you an example. One of the good byproducts of our agency now doing the procurement for CapCon and major maintenance, we're learning what it's like for agencies to get work done, and the most complicated ones. So we spent a lot of time with Department of Corrections, for example, and you can imagine in an incarcerated environment, all the way back to a job walk has to be set up. You have to keep backtracking. If this is the result, you have to back map, because even that has to be fully chaperoned and through the right people. And then every bit of that construction work has to have someone there overseeing that work. So it's not as nimble as other agencies in terms of their backlog and how they roll out and how they get that work done. And a lot of it is similar with military. That's very specific, the type of equipment and work and swap out, and then how many people are available. And you go back to Ms. Norton's comment about 0 bids on some of them. And so it's not just us on our end, it's how do you roll that out at our large agencies as well. And I know DOC is here today, but we have learned it is a difficult challenge for them to get work out and try to be nimble on the work, because it has to be overseen 24/7 by someone.
Go ahead.
Chairman, so if I understand maybe one example correctly, for example, we had planned on the state health facilities have their own major maintenance that goes to the Department of Health. And one of those major maintenance issues was to repave the streets or at the Life Resource Center. That was supposed to start 3 years ago. Couldn't the first year because the new construction wasn't completed. Boom. So they carry that money over. The next year, finished up, bids come in late in the season, hot mix plants shut down. So then that carried over year 2, thought, whoopee, we'll get it started this year, come to spring, go out, look at soliciting bids. Nobody's interested because they're committed to everything. So that may yet be put off a 3rd year. And so those funds would be carried over possibly till next year unless something miraculous happens this year. And so that's an example I understand to be accurate. If you could just confirm that, and perhaps that's not an anomaly for the trades around the state. Dave?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's correct. But we have to add that inflationary factor every year on top of that project. So it's not just waiting those years, you're adding dollars to those years.
Okay. Anything else?
Not from us. If you have any other questions.
Any further questions?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, just one other thought, because in Representative Larson's example, some of the things that cause the backlog is things that are weather dependent. Even that project, if we could have that specific project, if we could have got that bid and awarded, it was already approaching a late September, early October, if I remember correctly. And a lot of the concrete asphalt batch plants start shutting down by the end of October. So next year, your very first change order would have been for work, would have been for increased batch plant prices. So a lot of this thing is very weather dependent. You're chasing all the concrete, all the asphalt, all the roofers down, everyone, school side, everyone, colleges, community colleges, for that same 4 or 5 month window of summer here. And we just don't have enough available here in Wyoming.
So remind me the reason for the shutdown in 2020, was that COVID related? Or was it kind of getting a handle on things?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, that was due to the declining revenue forecast. In dire straits, if the revenue isn't there and there's a significant balance of cash available, I think that it was the executive branch desire to have those funds be available for the legislature to use as needed, if warranted.
So I'm just curious, obviously you have a list of projects.
I have a binder full. I haven't issued a letter this year, but last July, at every fiscal year, I intend to send, a memo to each agency of their approved CapCon and major maintenance projects, the major maintenance funding that is available. Again, I haven't compiled it for this July, but last July, it's significant, voluminous. Like I could provide that.
So is there a way that we can get a summary of that and how some of the projects are? And I'm curious how you prioritize. I mean, obviously emergency versus general request, but at some point you've got to balance that out. But I'm just curious what the list looks like, and to me, if we have to compare it to something that's existed in the past to know if it's a problem that we need to address. And so just something to help us flesh out the details.
Mr. Chairman, we can provide a summary.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none. Any public comment on what we've heard so far today? Please come on up. How are you, Richard?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Richard Garrett, citizen of Wyoming, born in Casper right now, Cheyenne, but I've been blessed to live in Lander too. Today is our state's birthday. We are the equality state, and we have a great deal to be proud of. And I am very grateful to this committee and to the legislature for your continued oversight and support of education in our state. And I just want to be very brief and offer you something that I ran across yesterday as I was researching for today's meeting, a study done by the Education Law Center, and I will share it with you, that reflects how our state's hard-earned dollars are achieving results in our education system. These are big numbers and they're all beyond me for sure. But the state's investment, bottom line, is creating a very equitable, and we are the equality state, a very equitable state of funding education throughout the state of Wyoming. There's no doubt we can always do better. And that's what you as legislators always strive for. But again, I will share this study with you. You've got a lot to be proud of, and I think you need to shine a light on studies like this to reassure your constituents and everybody in Wyoming that their dollars are being spent wisely and your stewardship is being taken seriously. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's all.
Great. We'd be happy to look at it, Richard. Okay. Thanks for your comments. Any other public comment before we take a break? Seeing none, it's 10:04. We'll be back in 12 and a half minutes. Don, anything else?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we had a power outage Friday afternoon, and we have had some issues beginning this morning at 5 a.m. So our building no longer has AC. So be mindful of that. We have looked at alternative locations, and it does not appear that the connector rooms in the basement are any cooler than this third floor, but we will continue to monitor that. And we have reserved another room if it does provide a difference of.
Well, and,
temperature.
and as is usual in appropriations, feel free to take your coat off and everybody else too.
We're used, Mr. Chairman, we're used to the heat and the pressure.
Okay, we'll have a short recess.
Mr. Chairman, I have a brief announcement. Today is Wyoming's birthday. July 10th is Statehood Day. And while I will not make the committee sing, I did bring red, white, and blue cupcakes to celebrate. So those are in the break room.
Somebody needs to taste test the blue frosting, see what happens.
Okay, next on our schedule is Mohammed. Give us an update on the projects. Welcome. Nice to see you again. So please proceed. Can you, microphone closer? Yeah.
There you go. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity you have given me today to give you an update regarding Wyoming gas injection initiative. So over the last year, since the funding was formally approved and finalized for this initiative, we have worked very closely with our colleagues at Dow Chemical Company and also with various members of university administration to advance the initiative. In parallel to this, we have also been interacting rather actively with a number of oil and gas operators in the state of Wyoming to ensure that we advance the initiative in such a manner that would be helpful to them when it comes to execute the plan for the initiative.
So Mohammed, if I can, some folks are new, so they don't know exactly what we did. So just kind of
background.
Give us a little background.
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. It has been almost, I would say, 6 years. I have been working rather closely with the Dow Chemical Company on a large pilot, enhanced oil recovery pilot in North Dakota, funded by Department of Energy. Back in 2021, we approached our colleagues in Dow Chemical Company came to visit with us, and I worked with them and the state officials to have them visit the state leadership, and we talked about whether the state would consider an opportunity through which we could deploy the same technology in the state of Wyoming. This is a rather novel technology we are deploying in North Dakota through close collaboration between Dow Chemical Company, an operator in North Dakota, and of course University of Wyoming at the Center of Innovation for Flow-Through Burst Media located at High Bay Research Facility. So we discussed this with the state leadership. We delivered subsequent to that visit, we delivered the proposal to the state requesting funding. And the model we discussed in that proposal was very similar to what we were doing together with Department of Energy and the operator in North Dakota. So that in the proposal, we suggested that we provide some support to the operators in the state of Wyoming to deploy novel enhanced oil recovery technologies in the state of Wyoming to increase the recovery from the declining fields. We have large volumes of crude oil, of course, sitting in many of these reservoirs a lot of these wells are declining. The idea was to use novel technologies to reinvigorate some of these wells. So subsequent to that, the funding, $25 million was approved on the condition that would be matched dollar for dollar. And we have since then, we have worked closely with Dow Chemical Company in order to advance the initiative. We have through that collaboration, we have developed a request for proposal that we released on June 15th last month. And we have, in that request for proposal, we have provided details of how we would do this. We have asked oil and gas operators in the state of Wyoming to submit proposals by the end of September this year. In their proposal, we have asked them to provide information about which locations within the state of Wyoming they would deploy the technology. We have asked them to provide petrophysical properties of their reservoirs and a number of other information that would then inform the decision-making process that we hope to undertake subsequent to the end of September deadline that we have listed in the RFP. Now, the idea is that we would deploy gas injection-based enhanced oil recovery processes in order to improve the recovery of oil from the assets that are oil and gas from oil assets in the state of Wyoming that are declining from using the existing wells. The idea is that we use the existing wells and not to drill new wells and reinvigorate those wells and enhance the production. This was the original proposal we submitted. The state of Wyoming had in it, even with the limited amount of outreach we had at that time, had formal support letters from 5 oil companies: Oxy, Devon, Denbury, True Oil, and Continental Resources, plus Dow Chemical Company. And then, and of course, after they heard about the positive response from the state of Wyoming, we have been at the High Bay Research Facility at the University of Wyoming. We have been receiving them to discuss the sites that they have in mind. So we have hosted a number of large groups at the University of Wyoming, during which we have discussed those opportunities. The Oxy has visited, Devon has visited. We've had conversations with the companies about their interest in the initiative. And I'm also delighted here to mention that even though that we have released the RFP just about 3 weeks ago, a bit more than 3 weeks ago, I've already received responses from companies indicating that they would like to apply. I cannot release the names because it's a confidential process, but it's a really exciting opportunity. And I'm very grateful for this. But later, if I have an opportunity, I would like to talk more about the logistics of it and complexities associated with the various aspects of the initiative that we are trying to handle. Mr. Chairman.
So questions from Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Professor Peary, thank you so much. A couple of questions. One is to congratulate you on what you're doing, your research. I see that you're one of the more prolific inventors at the University of Wyoming. You have several patents issued where you are either the primary inventor or a co-inventor in this space. So one of my questions is, from your point of view, it's a bit outside the scope here, but from your point of view, what can either the university do or the state do, or what can we do to promote there being more people like you who invent things that create valuable intellectual property? What can we do to promote that, just generally speaking? It's my first question. And the second question is, do you expect this particular project, the state's funding, to use these patents or intellectual property that you've helped create? And then how does it work with monetizing that? If, say, some other company wants to use it, how does the money flow, and how does either you or the university get paid for that?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, Representative Steve, thank you very much. I'll address the questions in the order you mentioned them. Question number one about how do we, thank you for your comments regarding our IP. The credit goes to my students and my postdocs who do the work. I have the privilege of being part of that, but the work is their work. So I'll be extra honest on this. In academia, I'm an academician. In academia, especially when you start as a tenure track faculty, you very concerned about, or you mostly focused on trying to develop your research such that you can make good progress towards getting your tenure. And you're less concerned about whether the work you're doing is something that can be protected as an IP, as a new IP, in the form of a know-how, or in the form of a trade secret, or in the form of a patent. And I was one of them, very honest. I wasn't interested. I was interested in the aspect. I was not interested in the aspect. I was interested in publishing. And as an academic institution, in an active or passive manner, requires faculty to do it. Not just here, anywhere in the developed world is like that. If you don't do that, you don't get tenure. But sadly, a lot of academic systems are not designed to entice development of intellectual property, capturing it, harvesting it, commercializing it, protecting it. That education, first of all, is not provided to professors during education. It wasn't provided to me when I was going through my education. But I was blessed, incredibly blessed, that sometime during my academic career, when I was an associate professor, I was introduced to and then became friends with very highly respected oil and gas executives, that they started talking to me that the value of doing this is beyond just financial aspects of it. It's about taking the technology from the papers that are sitting on the shelves and collecting dust and making them available to the public and thereby making a difference in people's lives. That resonated with me. And that individual also was ready and willing to provide education that I didn't have, right, in a more practical sense. And I took that to heart. And today I totally look at things very differently. And I think, number one, in order to make this happen more broadly across any academic institution, not just in Wyoming, this shouldn't be taken as a criticism to the University of Wyoming. And this is a problem in a lot of academic institutions. If you put some of the big tech universities like MIT and others aside, this is the problem in many universities. So I come from Princeton universities, and prior to that from Imperial College, so I can tell you to some extent is problem. The extent of it varies from one university to another. But how do you make this more broader and happen across the university? First of all, you make it part of the tenure process. You value if faculty develop IP as you value a paper they publish. I have talked about this to universities, academic affairs, and other university leadership. They welcome the idea, but it's very difficult to implement. They take it to heart. I can see that. But it's very difficult to implement because there's a resistance in institutional resistance, not just here, anywhere. First. Secondly, you try to recruit people that they are more interested in pursuing that, and that ties to hiring highest caliber people you can. And that's a very complicated matter because everyone wants to hire, and we have a challenge of hiring people in the state of Wyoming. So I don't know is that appropriate to say, but I would say is hiring people and retaining them. That's another problem that we are struggling with, and that I think goes to the root of this. So bottom line is about people. Hiring best people and retaining them, and that I think we have some challenge there. So about the second part of the question, sorry, that was a long answer to the first question. About second question regarding how you commercialize and capture the revenues, a number of ways. One way is that we just talked about here, talking about here in Wyoming gas injection. And another way, which I am also heavily involved in, is that licensing the IP. Once you harvest it, protect it, then you license it, and that licensing includes certain terms that returns revenue to the university and to the inventors. And I'm heavily involved in that. And I in a humble way, I would like to say that I have reached a point in that avenue that those revenues have, and that commercialization has resulted in new tech jobs in the University of Wyoming. Two spin-offs that I have helped fund in Laramie, that now they recruit UW graduates and into high-paying jobs, and those jobs are the result of the commercializing the technology that we conceived and then harvested and protected and licensed to generate commercialize, generate the revenue, and that revenue creates the job. This full circle in this center that is now advancing this initiative has been realized. There's an example of what you were asking for. I'm happy to go more details of it if needs be. Thank you.
Further questions? So go ahead.
Professor Perry, so I have a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman, and the first one is, so we appropriated the funds, I think, 3 years ago. Does that sound right?
Formally 1 year ago. The funding was approved last year.
What year did we appropriate?
Last year. The funding July 1st, 2022.
Yeah. That's
okay. Oh, that's right. That's right. We done it the year before, but it went into effect last year.
Yes, sir.
So first question is, are you on schedule?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, These, if I may, before directly answer that question, I'll provide a piece of information and then I'll answer the question. I'm involved in another pilot that I mentioned that helped us to propose this new initiative. That started in September 2019, and we are literally weeks and months away from going downhole with the gas that we have. The facility has been built, everything. We are talking about September 2019. Now we are July 2023, almost 5 years. And of course, there are 2 years of maybe a year and a half, 2 years of the delay caused by pandemic. But because of the complexity of this enhanced oil recovery, but amazingly exciting initiative is the reason for the fact that it's taken time. Now, let me go back to your question. Are we on time? Yes. In just 1 year since the funding, we have built infrastructure to support the projects. We have been putting in place I've been working with the university administration to put in place the administrative support that's needed to handle this extremely complex initiative. Financially, it's complex, technically, it's very complex. And in terms of the number of entities that are going to be involved, is very complex. So the short answer is yes, we're on track.
So then to follow up, Mr. Chairman, on page 6, and you alluded to it just now, you says that it would require an exceedingly complex budget.
Yes.
Why is that?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, I'm so grateful you asked that question. Here's the reason for it. Once, God willing, we get to the point that we select the winning oil and gas operators that they're going to deploy this technology, we are going to be providing dollars to cover portion of their field expenses, right? So in doing so, we are going to have certain metrics in place, which expenditures are permissible, which ones are not permissible. There are some certain metrics and certain criteria we have to use. And we have to do this in stages as I expect, as they spend their dollars and we would then spend our dollars to support them. That is very complex. I am already doing one of them in North Dakota. They are going to be spending at different times, depending what the equipment arrive, what they are buying, whether it's personnel, whether it's compressor, whether it's the material they're buying. It's going to happen over extended over a period of time, and it's going to be of different natures. And that requires very careful accounting and in order for me to ensure that indeed we are meeting this one-to-one requirement that is mandated by the state.
Mr. Chairman, but isn't that just kind of the nature of the oil and gas industry where you have multiple operators, then you're having to make an accounting to each operator for each expenditure and each down to make sure everybody's paying their fair share and that somebody's not.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, but please remember that we are going to be reimbursing the oil and gas companies for their expenditures.
Okay.
Right, and that means that they will be submitting their invoices or their reimbursement request, and that needs to be properly processed and handled such that we are using the dollars appropriately. That's what I mean by the complexity of it.
And so is the website up and running?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, yes. As of June 15, the website is full running. The files can be downloaded. We have protocols in place, how to respond to oil companies, backing up the files and all of that. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, very quickly, I mentioned about the website, not just information on the website, we have tried to reduce bureaucracy and make the information concise, but still detailed enough for them to understand the process. But also we have tried to make sure the submission of their application is such that it's not cumbersome. So we have requested only 2 files, one proposal and one Excel file in which they will list all the reservoir properties that we have requested. And they are all available, can be downloaded from the website.
Senator Kiske.
Representative Larson said he had 2 questions. Did you get a second in? Okay. Dr. Perry, thank you again for the tour of the center.
Yes,
and I shared with President Seidel that I thought what you were doing there was a model for the vision shared by many for the university to be a first-class research institution. It's impressive. When this appropriation first came to us, you recall, it did not come to us as part of the university's usual budget process because the opportunity arose very suddenly.
Exactly.
The second 25 million, will that come to us as part of the university's budget request? And if so, do you anticipate it'll be in this budget cycle?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinsky, I expect so. I have worked with a number of various members of university administration team, senior administration about this. So as I understand it, the second request is in the list of the requests that university is going to submit to state as of several weeks ago when I changed with university CFO. And I was told that it was on the list.
Okay,
Okay.
thank
so
you.
But I have very little control on how that has.
Well, the guy who can answer the question is sitting right behind you, so we'll find out. Thank you, Dr. Perry.
Thank you.
Further questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Perry, you've reached out to several companies, or several companies have expressed an interest in this program. Have you reached out to companies that have fields in areas of the state that you believe would be good, that the rock would be good for this type of research that maybe haven't already expressed an interest?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, we have, I mean, the companies that had originally expressed interest and subsequently visited with us, and these visits were substantial visits. I mean, we had people full of airplane full of people coming directly to Laramie to visit just about this and talking about the sites they would deploy. The pads and the locations that they had talked to us and considering what other facilities they had available seemed quite appropriate. However, it's really important to me that I ensure that we have a proper pre-review process for all of this. What do I mean by that? I have already selected two very experienced reservoir engineers, each one with decades of experience, that they are going to provide advisory role here. They are going to review the applications for us to make sure the rocks are appropriate, in addition to my own review and Dow's review. And this, I think this two-tier review process is going to help us to ensure that the sites that are proposed are appropriate. And also we have in place, to answer your question more directly, in place steps that we are taking right as we speak in order to more widely announce this through SPE, through Wyoming Oil and Gas Association, to have perhaps more widely the word spread so the people can be aware of it and apply. But of course, please remember the first round of funding is very limited. It's only $25 million. That probably may be enough for 2 or 3 pilots, considering, yeah.
Follow up, and all of those pilots would be in Wyoming, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Waltz, that's an absolute requirement. Not a single dime will be spent on any pilot outside Wyoming. This is a requirement. It's a requirement. The operators may not be located in Wyoming, but their field is in Wyoming. Yes. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate the update. Any further questions? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was wondering on the review committee, this is on page 6, the application review committee. Is there a member of SER who serves on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, we haven't finalized all I would say all the details of the review process yet. But the answer is yes. I have my colleagues from Enhanced Recovery Institute that technically sit under the CR, and the director of which is here in the room, Long Whitman. We know each other for a long time and we collaborate. And he will be, as you understand, Enhanced Recovery Institute has a deep knowledge of the state's oil and gas operations and the production in the state, and they know the oil and gas companies. So we collaborate from very beginning when this was on the play in the process getting approved. We have discussed and we interact as this is advanced. And in fact, that's the reason why Mr. Law.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thinking about collaborators and partners, could you give us some insight onto who will have access to the data that this project produces?
Yes,
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, that's extremely important. I would divide the data as of today, generally speaking, to 2 buckets. And of course, we may have more buckets as we move forward, but for just today's, bucket number one are the data that we have generated through a massive amount of data we have generated through this pilot in North Dakota is funded by DOE as the DOE dollars. I have every intention and I'm doing everything possible to make that fully available to all the operators that are going to do this in Wyoming. We have worked very hard. We have used our facility in University of Wyoming to generate it. So that's bucket number one that we are going to make available. So therefore the operators in Wyoming, they don't have to start from scratch when it comes to learning about this. Bucket number two would be the data we would generate through implementing these pilots in the state of Wyoming. Since, of course, the public dollars are involved here, one of the requirements we are going to have for the operators is that we make at least portion of the data available. Now, of course, there will be certain things, certain level of sanitization has to be done on the data before we can make them publicly available. But that would be, since we are using public dollars, we are going to require oil and gas companies allow us to make portion of the data available. Yes, ma'am. But there will be probably other buckets of the data that as we advance, and because I have a strong interest in taking this to new phases, I think it's critically important that the data we generate in every phase is made available to new phases, so that the experiences we gain are used in the new phases with the new companies. You're welcome.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none. Well, Mohammed, thank you very much. We look forward to find out who the applicants we pick and getting further updates as we move down the road.
Thank you, Representative Nicholas. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, next. Budget update for UW Capital Construction. Hey.
Morning, Mr.
Morning, Bill.
Welcome. Go see.
Please proceed.
Just dive right in, Mr. Chairman. So as of the end of the legislative session in March, $120 million was appropriated to UW for the 4 major capital construction projects in question. That's the housing was the biggest one, the west stands, the pool, and which one am I forgetting? The law school. So the law school wasn't actually part of the last appropriation because it was already under contract when we started back in March. So of those 3, and then also you appropriated $12.25 million for the build out of the science initiative building. So those are the 4 here. And it's actually $132.5 million or $0.25 million then when you count that. The only project that is not currently under contract is the pool. So housing went under, we got our GMP before the session was over, and you recall that discussion. Trustees acted in March upon completion of the legislative session and the appropriation. 80 million of the $120 million went toward housing. So 89? That 80 even. And then, Mr. Chairman, the next action was in May, and that was with the west stands, and that was $31.5 million went into that project. So it has a GMP and it has a contract, and that's as of May.
And what's the timing on that? Are we still on the?
So, Mr. Chairman, I told you last time it was a 2-part project. It's really sort of a 3-part project. So and we talked about that need to relocate all that equipment under the west stands. So that relocation, that athletics maintenance facility is currently under contract. It is being built. They just got the permits from the city last week, actually, to begin that. Remember, that's going to be south of the tennis complex. So that should complete, I think, in March. And then there's a 2-step on the stands themselves. So As soon as football season wraps up in November, they'll begin that in earnest. Lower west stands will start in November, December. They will mobilize at that point. Actually, they're kind of mobilizing right now over there to the extent that they can. They'll wrap up that piece of the project before the first game in 24. So in August, they'll wrap that piece up. And then at the conclusion of that season in November of 25, they'll start the second half, which is the loge and the remainder of the project. And that will, that'll wrap up in August of 25. So all in August of 25.
Go ahead. Just correct me on those dates. So that first one wrap up in August of 24.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
And then start in November 24, you said 25. But
I misspoke, Mr. Chairman.
24?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And wrap up the next August of 25.
Correct. That's correct, Mr. Chairman. The other project, the Science Initiative build out, that was also contracted in the May trustees meeting. So that one it has a GMP and is under contract and the work begins.
So what's the timing on that?
Should wrap up, Mr. Chairman, midsummer next year.
And the, how much of that impacts the classes in the building?
Mr. Chairman, it should not impact at all. Those unfinished areas are in isolated parts of the building. It should have minimal impacts.
So tell us about the pool.
Mr. Chairman, the pool right now, under trustee guidance, the all-in budget, so that includes the reserves and everything else. The all-in budget for the pool is $51 million. And the initial designs on the Grand Avenue version of the pool is well in excess of that, as you're aware. So we started looking at other sites. Where can we do this for less money with less impact on existing utilities and less site work, so to speak. So right now, the trustees and we have an exterior design advisory committee, which one of your members is on that committee with us. We are in the early discussion phases right now of trying to figure out where this thing's going to be and what it's going to look like for that budget.
So I think the original, at least the last time we talked, was roughly 92. I thought was the estimated cost of it.
I think that's roughly correct, Mr. Chairman. That was the 10-meter platform building, all stone, a lot of glass over right facing on Grand Avenue and tying into the old Corbett. So by not trying to tie into Corbett, that alone reduces that budget by in excess of $10 million.
That makes it 82.
That makes it 82, Mr. Chairman. Dropping it to a 5-meter platform takes about another $10 million out of it. Dropping the stone exterior is going to take another approximately $10 million out of that project.
Go ahead.
So help me understand, when the pool is completed, regardless of where you put it, what would be the final cost then?
Mr. Chairman, the current budget that has been allocated for that entire project is $51 million.
And that was approved by the trustees?
Thus far, it has been, Mr. Chairman.
When did that happen?
So, Mr. Chairman, we're talking about two different kinds of things. It was a bit of a two-step process too. So in May of 22, the whole portfolio of projects was approved at funding levels that ultimately didn't work. But that was where the initial breakout of where the funding was going to come from was established. The current $51 million is what is available for the project after all these other projects are considered and all the funding sources are considered. So there isn't a formal, this will be the budget. There's not a GMP and there's not a contract on it yet.
So I'm just doing the math. You've got essentially 110 of the 120 on the housing and the West Stands, right?
Mr. Chairman, all but $8.5 million was allocated between housing stands and I keep leaving one off. Housing and stands, yeah.
You know, and so in essence, where does break down the 51 million? Where's that coming from?
$51 million comes from, I don't have my proper cheat sheet in front of me, but Mr. Chairman, $51 million comes from a total of $21.5 million of prior appropriation from the legislature, the $56 million that was appropriated prior in 22 and 21, I think. $9.5 million of major maintenance monies from the 22-20 or 23-24 major maintenance, $500,000 of private gifts, an additional construction reserve amount from UW's internal construction reserve of $11 million. And that gets us, I think, to 42.5. And the remainder, I think the remainder then comes from the 8.5 of this 120.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, Bill, kind of going back to a conversation we had earlier today, if this is new construction, how's that major maintenance?
So, Mr. Chairman, great questions this morning too, and I kind of had to sit on my hands a little bit on this. So, in these cases, all of these buildings are old buildings. So the West Stands, you know, everything's basically 50 plus years old. So West Stands has a lot of ADA issues, a lot of structural issues, all things that qualify for major maintenance. Corbett Pool is the same way. It is a maintenance nightmare and it has ADA issues and that sort of thing. Pardon me.
So Bill, so if you move that to a different location and start new,
Mr. Chairman.
Then how was that major? Would you then just pull that 9 point whatever out of that budget?
Mr. Chairman, I think I would defer to legal minds on this, but I would think it would still qualify as major maintenance because it's essentially a replacement of a building that's failing.
So in that budget, do you have a tear down of the Corbett?
Mr. Chairman, we do not. So Corbett will remain standing, but it will not be a pool anymore under this plan. And there isn't a budget to take that pool out or anything yet, but it has been discussed and considered.
What are you going to do with it? What can you do with it besides a pool, I guess is the question.
Mr. Chairman, athletics has no shortage of ideas for that building. And then also we have kinesiology and physiology over there. So
you can use major maintenance for that, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, that is not the plan.
Well, but it is a fair part of the conversation because you're going to say, if we don't tear down that building, then it's going to require major maintenance for that specific geographic structure. but yet you're taking the money designated for that specific geographic structure and putting it over here into a new building?
It's a fair question, Mr. Chairman. I think Corbett is not going to work as a pool site anymore. That building, it is determined that that won't work as a pool site. So we're trying to come up with a pool.
But that determination is based upon dollar signs, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that Corbett won't work as a pool. I suppose if you throw enough money at anything, you can make it fly. Yes, it is a dollars. And it is also a site limitation problem.
So that you never discussed a site limitation on it with us before. I'd like to know more about that.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of utilities that run through there, and actually it has been a major component of consideration whether this is an appropriate site for it. So the big one is a big sewer line that runs through there, and how do you address that sewer line? There've been various iterations of lift stations and other ideas, but ultimately that's about a $10 million, not just the sewer, but all the utilities over there. It's about a
The
$10
sewer line
million
is
fee.
adjacent to it. It's not underneath it.
Correct, Mr. Chairman, but to put a pool to the south, it impacts it.
So that issue will never go away, depending on what you use that site for.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So if I may follow up, if in fact the 9 million maintenance is not, if the 9 million maintenance you cannot use, will you still go forward with the construction of a new pool at a different site?
It's a fair question, Mr. Chairman. I don't know. I don't think UW has the reserve capacity to be able to address that budget shortfall. What could happen, and I will tell you that you could justify pretty cleanly using a lot more major maintenance monies on the stands, and actually quite a bit more on the law school. Both of those are major maintenance headaches. And so I suppose you could shift monies around and make it balance.
Fair enough. Okay. Further, okay. Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill, do you see any change in the inflationary component as we look forward for the next 2 years? Is there any suggestion that a peak has happened and that maybe we're going to see a little bit less inflation? Or do we need to consider the fact that inflation is still going to go mad for the next 2 years and we need to be adding some extra money?
Great question, Mr. Chairman. I will say this, our goal is to get a building sited, designed, and under contract by November, December, or January, somewhere in there, to try to minimize that impact. I think that hopefully we've had the worst of the inflation so far, but it is a concern going forward.
So Bill, the 51 million, does that include a 10-meter board?
Mr. Chairman, it does not. It includes a 5-meter platform.
The 5 or the 10? You said you had a 5-meter or a 10-meter.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I heard the question correctly. Does the new iteration contain the 10-meter platform? No, it does not, Mr. Chairman. It contains a 5-meter platform, and that dropped about $10 million off of the price of that building.
But that's with the stone and everything else. I mean, like, to add 15 feet to the roof or 20 feet is a $10 million. So the 51 would go to 61.
I believe that's pretty close. It might be a little bit less than that under current considerations, but it's close to that.
So by not having a 10-meter, what does that do scholastic for the meets for intercollegiate?
So, Mr. Chairman, the discussion on the exterior group, which is actually not supposed to be part of the discussion on the exterior group, but everything ends up being discussed there. And athletics is included in those. And so Dave Deniston has been consulted on that issue. And really we're talking about just a few, potentially attracting a few kind of big meets that otherwise would not be attracted, but it doesn't impact our swimming and diving program.
Go ahead.
Following up on that, Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding from the athletics department that they don't practice on a 10-meter board very often due to the impact as you hit the water. And so really it's more a matter of for a handful of meets that may not even be NCAA sanctioned meets, but be more of an international type of meet that could come to the university and would like to due to the high altitude and other things that might utilize that kind of a 10-meter board. So really the 5-meter board for everything the university would do competition wise is what would meet the needs of the university.
Mr. Chairman, one additional point, and Representative Walters is right. When athletics has been doing this analysis on the benefit of having a 10-meter platform, one of the things they came up with was a distance to, if you recall the conversation, the distance to a major airport for that sort of international competition in Laramie is outside of that allowable distance. I think it's about 30 miles too far or something.
Okay, Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Bill. I thought I heard you say, correct me if I'm wrong, $500,000 in private donations for the pool. Is that correct? What's the number for the West Stands? Where are you so far with that?
Mr. Chairman, on the West Stands is $19.5 million total, and I think they are around 12 million right now, or 13 maybe.
Okay. And if I can follow up, the science, I was to make sure I got it straight. The science initiative funding that finishes that building. That's all in all done pretty much with that one. I won't quote you, but I just want to make sure I got it.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And then one more. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The housing component. It's all, when you say under contract, all of it is under contract, the whole, and you have funding for the contracted amount as it stands today for all of it.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. I think it's 290, just shy of $300 million. I think it's 297, 296.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What's the timing on the dorms?
Mr. Chairman, on the housing, actually, I'm optimistic on that south building. They're about to stand up that second tower crane there. And I think they are moving faster than really anybody anticipated, just because they have all the crews in place for the north building. So I think the south is going a little faster. The north building with the dining hall is supposed to be ready to go in July of 25. The south building, because of the delay, was then bumped out to September or so of late September of 25. But I'm hopeful we can bring that back in and have them both open in time for that academic year.
Go ahead.
Bill, could you just clarify me on the amount of private donations for the pool? Did you say the goal was 500,000 or we received 500,000?
Mr. Chairman, I think they have received that 500,000.
Thank you. And follow up, Mr. Chairman. And we touched just lightly on the build out. That's under contract, and you plan on it being finished when?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the SI build out is due to finish up in July of 24.
Thank you.
And update on the law school.
Mr. Chairman, that is under construction as well, and it is due to finish out in July of 24.
That's on time, on budget.
So far it is, had a little bit of a hiccup with regard to some existing drawings on the old building and bolt holes not lining up, but quick action, I think they've got it resolved as of now.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for stepping away from the subject, but going back to this conversation we had this morning on major maintenance. And I believe your buildings fall into that category where when they're built new, they don't start receiving major maintenance dollars for a few years out. Do you have any thoughts on that, Bill? On just your thoughts?
So, Mr. Chairman, I would say the majority of, we have a list of about $350 million of outstanding major maintenance. And of course, things come off of it, things get added to it, but roughly figure there's about $350 million of outstanding major maintenance. And I would say the vast majority of that demand is related to old infrastructure. So we have this nice new cadre of buildings that you've helped us build that don't have quite the challenges that 100 or 150-year-old buildings have. And a lot of what we're spending money on over there, you can't see it if you walk through the campus until we start working on it, because it's under your feet. A lot of it's in those tunnels, a lot of it's in the infrastructure in the old buildings. And so I would say every additional dollar, if that accelerates the dollars that come to the university, we will absolutely put them into play. Part of your prior conversation was about the backlog of prior appropriations. And when we changed out fiscal systems and fiscal approaches at the university, the trustees made a very careful and concerted effort to build reserves in proper ways, similar to what you've done for schools over the years and allowed schools to do for themselves. So the decision was made back in 15 or 16, I guess, that we were going to accelerate the pace of major maintenance expenditures. And rather than have that long list sitting there and having our operations unit hold on to a pot of money to be able to address emergency situations, just like you heard discussed in here. We said, okay, we have these other reserves that have been built for that purpose. Our responsibility is to put that major maintenance into the university and put it into the economy, frankly. And so there was an effort taken at that point. I think we have a little bit of money from the prior appropriation that hasn't been actually expended, but the projects are in design and the monies are for all intents and purposes committed. Even this biennium's major maintenance dollars, those projects are all being designed and the monies will be expended as quickly as we can get the projects executed. So additional dollars due to accelerating timing on new buildings coming on. I wouldn't say those monies would be earmarked for those buildings, but certainly they would be used in an accelerated way to address those ongoing needs. If you go to, Mr. Chairman, I just add one thing and say, normally I don't volunteer items for you to pick me apart on. But I will tell you, if you go to UW right now and you walk around Prexy's pasture, you'll see that there is an awful lot of construction going on, even in Prexy's. And almost all of that is related to the hot and chilled water distribution system that's tying into that West Campus satellite energy plant. So that's where a fair amount of this money is going. A little over 3 million, 3.5 million maybe is going into that. So we're trying to get off of the old systems that don't work as well and get onto this new plant.
And what's the status of the parking garage?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to report that it is operational. the street in front, Ivinson, has been redone and reopened, that piece there. They're running buses through it, they're parking in it, and the elevator was the last piece remaining on it. And I believe it's a matter of days or maybe short weeks until it's fully operational too. So it's about done.
And the police station?
Police station is in the parking garage and it's fantastic, state of the art. Love to bring the new.
Operational?
Mhm.
Operational?
Operational. Everybody's in there. They're out of the old PD. And in fact, I believe in August or maybe even late this month, we'll be taking down that old PD building over there on Bradley and 15th. And that'll be a temporary parking lot.
Chairman,
Senator Grove.
to follow up on the parking, and first I know stipulate that between now and the end of 25, there's a lot of construction, a lot of areas that are taken up for staging and everything else. But at the end of the day, when it's all the projects that we've got on this list are done, there's just been a lot of questions. I get questions all the time about lack of parking. And I try to defend you on that and saying, hey, wait till it's done and see where it all settles out. Am I just blowing smoke, or is that when we get done with this, you've got a plan together that will adequately address the parking needs of all the new building that we've done? Or is there more to come or more on the board on that?
It's kind of a loaded question, Mr. Chairman. Depends what your assumptions are going forward. I will say this, the opening of that parking garage almost immediately quelled a lot of the parking complaints at UW simultaneously. So we were trying to sort of provide some alternatives for people because they don't want to walk across campus from the parking garage, and some folks don't want to get on a bus to get to the other parts of campus. So we had some property north of the engineering building, and trustees made the decision to take those. It was residential primarily. We took those down and made that a temporary parking area. So I think that provided about 35 spots or so. We're attempting to try to get some of that engineering and science building parking pressure off of the local residents and get it into one of our lots. Same kind of, we've actually done that with 3 or 4 different lots now over on the north side. So recall we built the transit facility on South 15th. That freed up a lot of parking where buses had previously been stored and where fleet had been stored. And now this chunk over there, we actually have the whole block at 15th and Bradley. That whole block will be converted into a temporary surface lot. And the intent with that is the phase 2, if it ever happens, the phase 2 of the housing project, if you recall, and this is going back a year or two, is to have a third housing facility where the current service building exists at Lewis and 15th. Lewis and the service building would have to be relocated somewhere to do that. And then the next block north is where the old PD is right now. And that was in that phase 2 of the housing renewal. That was going to be sort of a catty corner additional parking garage that would mirror that one over at 9th and Ivinson. So there's a plan for the expansion, but I think we did an analysis on it. And I think there's about maybe just less than 500 additional parking spaces now available. Or I think it may be more than that, actually. I'll pull it and send it to you. But between 500 and 1,000 additional parking spaces provided between the garage and all those surface lots over on the north side, even counting the loss of the Union lot, which is what caused so much consternation.
Mr. Chairman, And with the new transit center and with the transit plan, I know people don't necessarily want to, but between those two, that we've got an integrated plan to work on that going forward. And I think that's the point. Like I say, between now and then with construction and a lot of moving parts, it's never going to be satisfied. And then I wasn't trying to load you on the question. I just saying, I think I know, I think I can visualize it in my head, but I know it's hard to explain to people. I'm just trying to make sure.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. And I would say that between the transit and the current parking, we're even with the construction going on, I think we're in better shape than we were. Don't ask that of those people that want to park in that Union lot, but for all other people who park on that campus, I think we're in better shape than we were.
And me, I just ride with the chairman. He seems to be able to get around pretty good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to your maintenance log. So you said 350 million. If you could help me visualize some of the feedback we got from the state construction department in terms of why sometimes routine maintenance doesn't get done, then which results in a backlog of that maintenance. And one of the reasons we heard was a lack of staff. So my question is, in terms of your routine maintenance, do you have enough people on staff that are keeping these buildings in good shape? And then are you paying a wage that retains and rewards that workforce so that they're motivated to prevent this major maintenance backlog? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, those are good and fair questions. And I guess I will answer a couple of different ways. I think as of right now, no, we don't have an adequate staff. We're trying to address it, and we got permission from trustees through their budget allocation process. We're currently searching for 6 additional folks, and our intent is to, before the end of the current fiscal year, we'd like to have 7 additional folks hired. That's still not going to get us where we need to be, but it's a big help for us. We're targeting folks like electricians and plumbers and custodial staff. The folks who are actually out there doing the work. I think the university administration and the trustees, with the help of the legislature, has prioritized salary monies for those positions specifically. So not the 13, but everybody that's in those positions. The bulk of the salary resources are going to the, in fact, it was an agreed upon plan, I believe, back in, I think in the November trustees meeting, that 80% of any new salary funding would be allocated to staff positions. It's to the lower level. I shouldn't exclude the faculty from this because I'm sure they're included too, but the lower paid echelon of employees at UW. And I think it has helped, but even trying to go to a minimum $15 wage, which to me seems like a lot, but to most people, it obviously doesn't. We still have 11 custodial openings out of about 100 total positions, and we just can't get them all filled at once. We have a lot of turnover in those areas. We're starting to have turnover in the trades and that kind of thing, and we're doing our best to address it. I think the efforts of our HR department this year will go a long way toward helping with that. They did a big study on regional wages, that sort of thing. I think it'll help us.
Okay. Further questions?
Mr. Coacher.
Go ahead.
Mr. Maya, I'll give you the question, then a little bit of background. But do you have plans? And if so, when do you intend to update the campus master building plan to incorporate a vision for preservation and building of sorority row and Greek row? And so, by way of background, John Hirsch contacted President Seidel. I did as well. The president said that the university is absolutely committed to Greek life on campus. But in that campus master plan, which is an impressive document, there's not a word about sorority or fraternity row. And there's a lot of detail about a lot of other aspects of the campus. And so at what point do you anticipate that book will actually reflect a tangible commitment in the future construction plans for fraternities? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the question, Senator Kinski. And I did speak with Mr. Hirsch and a group that he brought with him. And I think he had a follow-up conversation then with the president. And I don't think UW has swayed at all from its commitment to Greek life on campus. It was a priority of the prior president. And even though it wasn't very clearly stated in the campus master plan, there are some references to it and to that Greek row remaining intact and inviolate. We are committed to maintaining that and improving it. Frankly, right now, some of the conditions of the houses over there are not very good and are liability for everybody. Be happy to talk to you about a couple of those offline if you'd like to have the conversation. I think it might be a little bit of a exec session sort of topic in some cases, but I don't know when the campus master plan will get a new update, but we will certainly make that a key component of it. I think the housing plan also talked about Greek life, and there was I know in at least a few of the housing master planning, the housing strategy meetings that went on over a couple of years with this task force that was formed at the legislature, there were discussions about the integrity of Greek row.
Yeah. If you could, both those documents are voluminous. If you might send me just a copy of the relevant pages where that commitment to Greek life is called out in the housing plan and in the campus master plan, I couldn't find them.
I will do so, Mr. Chairman. It's not real specific and it's not real voluminous, but I will send you what is in there.
I'll take what I can get.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, just to follow up on that, Mr. Hirsch is a good friend of mine, but frankly, a lot of those buildings are an eyesore. And obviously those fraternities particularly don't have the money to upgrade them or improve them or make them match the community campus. And so there has been lots of discussions over the past 10 or 15 years of relocating and help constructing nicer, newer fraternities buildings that are newer, nicer, in a better location, and then have other uses for that, you know, the most cherry locations of the on that campus. And so there's two sides to that story, and it's not an easy problem to solve. And particularly, I mean, I've had lots of relationships in and around those buildings, and it's a real issue.
Mr. Co-Chair, I get Mr. Co-Chair, I get that, but what the frat alumni and the sorority alumni here is relocate, use the area for something else. What they don't see is a plan for what the alternative is. And so I think a lot of those concerns can be allayed if there is an actual plan with buy-in from those groups. I get it though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody else?
Co-Chair, just a quick question for Mr. Smith.
Please.
Following up, is university working to provide enough resource to Dr. Peary that budget request for the second tranche, the 25 million on the project, will come to us in the university's budget?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, my understanding of the timing of that process is there is a
a list currently before the Board of Trustees for consideration of that would make up our request to the governor and to the legislature for this cycle. And that will be looked at the meeting this month in July and then approved in August, I believe is the time frame. So it is on a list. Whether that's the final list or not is up to the Board of Trustees through their process.
Follow up, please.
Please.
And on that list, the projected date for the second 25 would be in the upcoming biennium.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kinski, that's correct. The list I'm speaking of is for this next biennium.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, further questions? For Bill? Going once, going twice? Okay, do we have any public comment on the presentations we've had so far this morning? Public comment? Don, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, you are running ahead of schedule. You certainly can take leave for lunch now if you so desire. Alternatively, we do have staff, Polly Scott is available, and she could make her presentations on retirement system, workers' comp, and UI before the lunch break. Your call.
So committee, what's your preference? I'm inclined to break for lunch now and come back at 12:30.
I have a noon call, so a break now would be great.
Okay. That way we won't have to be rushed through it. Okay, so we're going to stand and recess till, we'll say 12:30, 12:40. And we'll begin then.